YouTube. Oh man, looks like I'm a minute or two late. Reaper said it's 3:31 p.m. and there's no stream. Well, Reaper, that's why in one of the streams I was giving my little rant about how it's good to be between approximately 10 minutes early and 5 minutes late, because you have to allow for yourself to have some wiggle room in case you run into a hiccup here or there. So in this case, yes, the 1 minute to 2 minute late freedom has been helpful. Okay, Reaper says setting chat to live. Yes, I remembered this pro tip that you gave me, so I have gone ahead and made sure it's not top chat but live chat. We got to know all the top YouTube techniques. Alright, so today we have quite a lot to talk about. I'm going to plan on just powering through and covering all the stuff that I've outlined in my notes here, and this will take us through the Technological Society by Jacques Ellul, Chapter 2. So for those of you who are watching this who are new to this stream or new to this channel, just give a brief blurb here. You could watch this as a standalone episode, by the way. I'm going to make sure to contextualize things. So in this stream, we've been discussing this book, The Technological Society by Jacques Ellul, which was recommended by a friend of the show. So how did we find this book? If you go to my stream and you look at the very first ones I did, they're concerning the metaverse. I started doing streams when around the time Mark Zuckerberg announced Facebook's renaming to be called Meta, and I started to do a little analysis of that, drawing from my own experience. I'm a millennial generation Asian American male that grew up playing some video games. My own background's in linguistics and philosophy, so I've studied a bunch of that stuff, but also I've studied a lot of computer science and have done a lot of work in tech and still do some work in tech. So that's my background, and I started making these videos because I felt that there were some things that weren't being said elsewhere on the internet that I had some special experience in. So I'm making these videos and they've been positively received by a lot of people, so I'm just going to continue making them as long as there's content and things to talk about. So with that blurb out of the way, this book, The Technological Society by Jacques Ellul, it involves, the whole book is about this thing which he calls technique. So broadly speaking, technique, it's related to technology. There's like technology, you could say like, here, I'm going to pull out a magnifying glass. So this is a magnifying glass. What does it do? Well, if you put it over something, you could see more clearly. It makes it bigger. We could even do let's do some mad optical effects. Look, I'm going to hold it up to my webcam. Magnifying glass. Whoa! Look at that. Look at that filter. Very, very high entertainment value on the stream. Anyway, so that's like a technology, a tool which could help you do a specific thing better, more efficiently. So like a computer is the obvious example of technology. What does a computer allow you to do more effectively? One of the things is reaching worldwide audiences. So I choose to go on YouTube like this. Then I could talk to people that are on the other side of the planet. So technology. Now beyond technology though, we could talk about how technique also includes stuff like government, economics, management techniques. So people don't typically think of like business practices or even the law as a kind of technique unless maybe they're a specialist or a theorist of these areas. But we could look at how these things too are a way of systematizing what might be done in a normal human-to-human way. So you could look at like rules, for example, as being you don't need any person present there. You have a system that tells people the way that they have to act, and then if they don't act that way, then maybe the rules will have an automatic system of punishing people. So in our current era, we're seeing more and more and more digital technology everywhere, such that if you did a bad thing, for example, then you might have your account banned, your account blocked, something like this. So this is kind of an example of how technology, a technique, is becoming much more efficient in the modern world in its current iteration. Whereas in the past, you know, if you were out of the reach of prying eyes and stuff, maybe you could get away with stuff a lot longer. But clearly, a lot of people are concerned about increased digital surveillance and all that sort of stuff, for the very reason that this stuff is much more present. Reaper asks a question. He says, "Are you an autodidact?" And to that, I would say nobody is truly an autodidact, but I have personally selected sources and people I have learned things from. So in that sense, I would say, yes, I have exercised autonomy in my education. Okay, I wanted to share the spicy word before getting into the meat of the Jacques Ellul book. So on the screen, you could see, I have a headline here: Algocracy and Surveillance Capitalism. We live in a world governed by algorithms. And then another thing here: Algocracy for common good or authoritarianism. So in some previous stream, I've talked about how a lot of this discussion about algorithms, artificial intelligence, basically all this means is automating the law, the execution and application of the law, and putting it with computers. So I think I called it like digital governance, something like that. So just as we've talked, we have terms like democracy, or what's another, bureaucracy. These words, some nerds have come up with this word algocracy to characterize being ruled under a system of algorithms. And if you search this term, maybe if we go on Google Trends, we could see if more people have been talking about this term. Let's just check. Algocracy. And let's also add a term. Oh, not enough data. All right, it's too edgy. Let's just try technocracy, a bit more of a punchy general term. Okay, going down. Interesting. Looks like in this video game, Stellar's video game. We'll give them some marketing. So a common thing in genre of video games is like world simulation, civilization simulation, and like I know in this game, for example, you could run your planetary empire and select the form of government, do all sorts of stuff. All right, end of unpaid advertising. Let's get back on topic. So, yeah, just justifying the existence of the stream, I suppose. So I found that this Jacques Ellul book I started reading at the recommendation of a viewer of this stream was tied into all of these different topics coming up on the news, and that people I know and speak with have been discussing, like peripherally, all these different topics. The metaverse, for instance, we had this in news announcements, is closely related to this, you could call it a genre of literature called cyberpunk. And then I've been looking more into various religious topics as well, and all this stuff connects. So if you stick around, you could see how all these things connect, and maybe there's some topics that you're wondering about yourself. If so, feel free to drop them in the chat, drop them in the comments, and I will try to make this stream relevant to you. With that being said, there's a lot to cover today, so I'm going to get started. So, okay, building off from last time, where we left off was Jacques Ellul characterizing this technique thing we're talking about. So, he mentioned how in previous eras, and he's writing from the mid-20th century, but in previous eras, we had technique, of course. Humans have been using technology since, well, the beginning of written history, for the obvious reason that the only reason we have written history is because there has to be some sort of technology to allow that history to be written. So all we know about history has come through a filter of technology in that sense. Okay, so historically, though, we see technique applied only in narrow, limited areas. So, for example, if you're a soldier, then you would have the technology that goes into making your various weapons, armor, that sort of stuff. But going into modern times, then technology has become less narrow. For example, if I ask you, what is a personal computer for? Then a personal computer, of course, could do all sorts of stuff. It could be used for communication mainly, but then other people might do other things such as, AutoCAD, industrial design, stuff like that. People might use a computer to do any manner of work these days. Okay, secondly, there's the artificiality, operating in an artificial as opposed to natural world. So we could see from the beginning how applying technology in various ways, it's changing how stuff normally works and allowing you to do things in a different way. So an example I gave was typing on a computer. So if normally you would write by hand, then typing on a computer transforms the process at which you do communication. And we could even say before that we would communicate with their tongue, with their ears, with their eyes. But allowing to write on paper, now this allows people, or not even on paper, a stone tablet, a slab of wood, whatever it is, then this would allow people to communicate over time and distance. So the normal rules that would apply, such as I could only talk to someone that's right in front of me, then this is transformed. There's an artificiality with the application of technology, which means that people could operate by different rules. So you no longer have the constraint, I could only talk to someone who's right in front of me. Suddenly you could talk to people in the past, or in the future, or over great distances. All right, the third thing here, automatism. So the process continues without human decision. So we could even see this in kind of low-tech application. So if you had a business, let's say a bakery, it operates in a particular way. If the systems, the processes of this thing are very well established, then perhaps like one of the people, the bakers, quits. Well, then you would already have a system in place such that you could hire and train up a new baker to replace that person. So there would be a cost of time and some other things, to get that person up to speed. But the bakery is a sort of autonomous entity that could operate automatically, even if you would take out one of the people. Or you could even say, like, if a business is passed down through a family or something, that the business has kind of taken on a life of its own in a way. Okay, and then lastly, the thing that Jacques Ellul brought up was self-augmentation, which is a system having some mechanism to improve itself. And one of the examples he gave was like a suggestion box at a factory or business. So the workers are doing their work all day, whatever it is that they're doing. And if the workers have some suggestion for how to run the factory better, then there might be some anonymous system by which they could ask the boss or whoever to run the system more effectively. A more contemporary example of this sort of thing would be GitHub and open source software. So GitHub, open source software, this is like a company doesn't just write all their code themselves. Instead, they're fielding the talent, the interest of developers from all around the world, and people will like do work for free. Now, why will they do work? Why will people contribute to open source code? I mean, there's many reasons. Among others, people, they want to get hired. So if they show an example of them contributing, writing code, doing all these things, then a company might say, oh yeah, I know this person knows how to fix problems and stuff, so I'm going to bring this person in and pay them full time to do this work that we need done. So that would be an example of self-augmentation in the current era, but in the past we see it too. So in this section, Jacques Ellul moves to talk about 3 different things that distinguish technique in his era. So he's writing from the mid-20th century, and I think these things still apply today in the modern world, going into the digital age of the metaverse, whatever we want to call it. But he names these 3 additional things that he states or argues are more particular to our current iteration of the technological society. So the technological society start off relatively weak. You just see techniques here, techniques there. Like a bakery, they might use specific technologies, techniques to do what they do. They might organize their bakery, try to be more efficient. But they're a separate, different entity from, say, the wagon wheel shop over here, or the whatever tan hiding place over here. They're all different. In the 20th century, though, Jacques Ellul makes the case that we see these 3 attributes coming to the technological society: monism, universalism, and autonomy. So the remainder of this stream will be talking about these 3 principles and how we see them at play today. And it's going to get pretty spicy. Jacques Ellul himself does not hold back in his rhetoric, so there's a lot to look at here. Okay, so just some general observations about all this. Firstly, we're going to see a lot of sort of Far East religious underpinnings to a lot of these ideas. So the things that Jacques Ellul is talking about, I'll use the word being instantiated through technology, through technique. These ideas are expressed, though not in the same terms, in religious texts of different places in the past. Another way to say this is like, you might talk about the specifics of the metaverse, but the actual projects, what they're trying to do with something like the metaverse, like make an alternative digital plane reality that doesn't obey the constraints of time and space in our world, then people have been talking about how to do that sort of thing in past eras. It's just they didn't have the specifics, the instantiations of the technology we have today. The second thing is, right, so we're going to be talking about technique like it's this thing. So I gave a sort of description of what technique is here for the people that are just joining this stream, but I think we just keep on using that word, talking about it. You'll get an idea about what is meant when Jacques Ellul talks about it. But he talks about technique as being a singular thing, a kind of monad. So we'll be talking about monism, universal. So it's applicable everywhere. It's not talking about something specific, like I could talk about a specific like Chinese characters, or I could talk more broadly about writing systems, or even more broadly representational systems. So it's a universal like symbolism rather than specific like Chinese characters. And lastly, he talks about technique being an autonomous thing. So technique saying is like a thing apart from ethics, morality, all sorts of stuff, and he'll get into that. But just know, technique it's like this huge big thing that he's talking about. That's why he's writing like a 400+ page book on it. Okay, and then some sort of viewer questions I came up for you all as you listen to or watch this stream are: how are different people made to build, serve, animate, or whatever? So how do we participate with the big technique thing? How do we participate in the technological society? That's one way in which reading this book is useful. This book is describing the technological society. Now we could ask of ourselves, how is it that we are being made to participate and operate with this thing? And the second question I have is, what does technique oppose? So we're going to hear a lot of big, kind of scary language about what technique is and where it is. So a question to ask is, okay, if this big thing is technique, why is the world going this way? What is there a principle, a person? What is technique going against, right? Because you're optimizing and you're designing these systems in order to go against something. Like there's a sense when I say if I'm doing farming, then I'm going against the natural order of how the plants and stuff grow. There's like a natural way things are. So then when I do a farming technique, then by doing farming, I'm modifying the landscape in a way. I'm applying work in order to change things. So what is technique being used to change the world from? Okay, so with those little blurbs out of the way, we could proceed to look at some other stuff. Well, actually, let's do some screen splitting action so we could even keep those points up here while we talk about stuff. And cool. All right. So it looks like no new messages in the chat yet, so I'll just continue. So the first topic for today is this idea of monism. So I found this funny rare Pepe that I put up here, the monad Pepe, monism. And then I'm going to pull up the Wikipedia article on monism here. So you could see the circle dot was used by Pythagoreans and later Greeks to represent the first metaphysical being, the monad or the absolute. And you could see how monad Pepe is a kind of homage to that. Okay, so what is monism? So here I had a definition that I copied from Wikipedia that we could go over. So monism attributes oneness or singleness, from Greek monos, to a concept like existence. Various kinds of monism can be distinguished, blah, blah, blah. And Wikipedia will go and talk about different forms of monism. We don't need to get to the specifics of that on this stream, but I wanted to highlight how a lot of these monism stuff, as I've highlighted in my notes here, let's see, general observations, is that many of these ideas have far East religious pinning. So they'll be found in like Hinduism, Buddhism, this type of religion. So here, I'm by no means an expert on all these, so I'm not going to try to explain what this stuff means. But this is just to say, you look at this Wikipedia page, and there's a whole bunch of stuff treating the monism that has to do with these very old religions, including the Indic religions, which a lot of people still believe in and practice to this day. Okay. So, with that being said, let us continue. In what sense is technique, and how does monism characterize technique? So, Ellul presents technique as a uniting principle. It makes all sorts of things as one. So, I got some quotes that we could analyze here. Here's one. The technical phenomenon embracing all these separate techniques forms a whole. The monism of technique was already obvious to us when we determined on the basis of the evidence that the technical phenomenon presents everywhere and essentially the same characteristics. So As I said, starting the stream, we could look at technique and technology in various separate domains, such as what do bakers use, what do carpenters use, and so on and so forth. Jacques Ellul's generalizing technique, so here he calls it the technical phenomenon, and he talks about how it embraces and makes all things one. Okay, so let's look at another quote by Jacques Ellul. He says, just as there are principles common to things as different as a wireless set, so I think he means a TV or radio or something like that, and an internal combustion engine, so the organization of an office and the construction of an aircraft have certain identical features. This identity is the primary mark of that thoroughgoing unity which makes the technical phenomenon a single essence despite the extreme diversity of its appearance. Okay, so how is all one? How is all one? The claim here being made with technique, the so-called technical phenomenon, is you have all these different forms appear in various different ways, but they're all united by some spirit, by something. I don't know what you would want to call it. And Jacques Ellul argues that that is the technical phenomenon, technique. So things look different, but they're all one, right? And in that sense, let's bring up Monad Pepe again. We're seeing how Monad Pepe comes to be. Okay, so why is it important to talk about how all is one? So here's another Jacques Ellul quote from the book. He says, it is common practice, for example, to deny the unity of the technical complex as to be able to fasten hopes on one or another of its branches. So if you're a specialist in a particular domain, I have an example that I wrote here, like nerds that are programming. You might say like, oh yeah, I'm smart. Yeah, I do computer programming. But you're just a business major. You're a dum-dum. I'm smart. Then to have that sort of attitude and to approach things like that, that would be incorrect because the technical complex is one. So just as a computer programmer is participating in one aspect of using and doing technique, participating in the technical phenomenon, so the person that's in business, communication, news media, whatever it is, all these different people are participating in the technical complex in different ways. So the nerd is premature in dismissing other people as not being as big-brained as he is, though, you know, he might have very specialized technical knowledge. It isn't to discount the accomplishments or the knowledge of that nerd. Okay, so let's continue here. An interesting point. So I just want to bring up fact about this author Jacques Ellul we're talking about. So if people have been viewing this stream from the beginning, then you have probably seen me bring this up at least a couple times, that this author Jacques Ellul, who wrote this book, he was also very knowledgeable about propaganda. He in fact wrote a whole book on propaganda, which I'm showing on screen here. Propaganda, the Formation of Man's Attitudes. So, and let's see when this was. 1962. Okay, so he wrote this book after he wrote The Technological Society. Jacques Ellul wrote The Technological Society in French in 1954. And then about, 8 years or so later, he wrote this book on propaganda. But let's see what he has to say about propaganda in The Technological Society, the book we're looking at now. Here's what he has to say. And I quote, "The content of newspapers is not the product of chance or of some economic form. It is the result of precise psychological and psychoanalytical techniques. These techniques have their goal, the bringing to the individual of that which is indispensable for his satisfaction in the condition in which the machine has placed him. of inhibiting in him the sense of revolution, of subjugating him by flattering. In other words, journalistic content is a technical complex expressly intended to adapt the man to the machine. Oh, we're joined by another friend, George. Hi, George. Welcome to the stream. Okay, so here we're talking about the monad, the technical complex, whatever we want to call it, as a monad. And we could see that the journalist has a role to play in this, just as the computer programmer, the factory worker, whatever you're doing, they're all working in and for this thing in a similar capacity. So one might look at a newspaper, the media. A kind of naive view would just be to say, what's the point of a newspaper? Oh, I don't know. It's just good to keep people informed, right? That would be one way to look at the newspaper, and I would say that that sort of approach probably is not absent from the news. Like right now, I'm just telling you stuff. Why am I telling you stuff? Because I think it might be useful to tell you stuff. So in this sense, right, I'm participating in the journalism to a sense that I'm reporting on things. So there is a sense in which that could be true. But if we look at the editorial direction of a newspaper, the editorial mission of some like NGO or something, then usually people have a thing that they're doing, and very often they will announce this for you. So this is not a mystery, something weird. Like, for example, the other day I was looking at what was it? This article on Cambodian. What was it called? Rest of the World was the name of the publication. Global tech stories. So I was looking at this. So you could say, why does something like Rest of the World reporting global tech stories, why does something like this even exist? And usually, if you have a big publication, they will just tell you why they do what they're doing. So if I say about us, what will they say? So they're a non-profit journalism organization. And what do? Documenting what happens when technology, culture, and the human experience collide. So documenting, right? They're telling stories. They're doing a thing. And helping can benefit, right? They want to give people a broader global perspective. Tell people about why people are doing stuff, and make people not so insular and just thinking about their own community, but looking on and seeing what people are doing in other parts of the world. So what would the purpose of this be more broadly, perhaps? So here in this quote about journalism and its purpose, we have a little say, satisfaction in the condition in which the machine has placed him, right? So by reading about different places in the world, a big thing that sells nowadays is like international travel, that sort of thing. So if you read these travel magazines, watch these travel articles, it's like, oh wow, it'd be cool if I visited like Thailand or something. Then this could help keep people satisfied, because then they have ideas about cool places they could escape to. So I think, this might be more, not so much travel oriented. It's more about digital stuff. But I'm sure it would not be hard to find a travel publication. So I won't pull one up unless someone suggests one. Otherwise, I'll just continue. Okay, here's another one. Jacques Ellul says, content in newspapers is for inhibiting in him the sense of revolution. So you could let's think of revolution as the ultimate scare of an establishment is that people would rise up in arms against them or physically overthrow them in some sense. Or just totally lose trust in them and just ignore them and not obey them anymore. That would be another kind of revolution. So how do you quell revolution? One of the big ways to quell revolution is to give people ideas to inform them how through their participation in the system, rather than rejecting the system, they will be able to affect change. So if you're unhappy with some stuff, for example, Orange Man bad, you're unhappy with Orange Man, then if you believe in the system and trust, I vote in a particular way that I want, and through this I could affect positive change, this sort of idea. I think the technical term for this would be political efficacy. Let's take a look, see if I'm right about that. Okay, yeah, in political science, political efficacy is the citizens' trust in their ability to change the government and belief that they can understand and influence political affairs. So if people have a lot of political efficacy, then they're probably not going to have a sense of rebellion, right? Because they believe through civic engagement, whatever it is that you're talking about, whether it's voting, attending a protest, getting educated, rising up through the university, through one of these means, that they could impact and change the way that the order is running. If somebody has that sort of sense, then they're not going to rebel because they're captured, so to speak. And finally, here Jacques Ellul lists subjugating him to flattery, which I thought was perhaps the most interesting of this, which is to say, if somebody's reading a newspaper, like I'm going to include these modern publications in it, like let's say I'm reading Rest of the World, then I might say to myself, oh, you know, I'm a smart cosmopolitan person. Oh, you're just you're parochial. You only look in your immediate surroundings. Oh, you need to travel more. You need to get some perspective, right? So if journalism publications are able to flatter people by making them think of themselves as having a greater sense of how the world works, having a greater sense of like, oh yeah, have you thought about the plight of women's rights in India? Well, I've thought about those. In fact, I donated money to that. Well, then you capture people by flattery, because they then identify with some party in the stories that you're presenting, and insofar as they support the organization, let's say they donated money somewhere, then they carry with them the prestige having done that. Okay, and then let's see. Yeah, so I just made a couple notes about this quote, this point. The first is with regards to the sciences. So, and this goes to the monism topic as well. So the monism topic is saying how all these different pieces, whether it's journalists, scientists, computer programmers, they're all participants in the technological society in a similar way. And then the point here that I was making is through the so-called soft sciences, so psychology, communication, linguistics, whatever you want to call it, right? These things are also scientific in that people are gathering data, making models, and learning from them. Maybe they're only more recently made quantitative. Maybe for a longer time they were qualitative in some ways. Whereas, for example, like consider shooting arrows, like shooting a bow and arrow, right? Then for a long time, studying warfare wasn't a quantitative thing. You could just practice shooting arrows, find the best training methods, all this stuff. That would be a kind of qualitative study of the techniques of warfare. But then warfare became quantitative in that people learned how to calculate the trajectories of missiles and stuff, such that you're not like a skilled operator at eyeballing things and using a trebuchet to like launch projectiles and take down castle walls. Now, you do math, science, engineer type stuff, and that is the manner in which warfare is done a lot of the time. So we can see it the same way with the so-called soft sciences. It's lagged behind like military technology in this way, in that only with computers as these massive information gathering machines is like automatic text analysis possible. Before, if you wanted to do that sort of intelligence work, right, you might have to hire a bunch of feds to read a bunch of books, to do all sorts of stuff. Think of a detective like looking through all these newspaper clippings. Now it's done digitally for the most part. So the so-called soft sciences too, these are also actively even the humanities. Like I'm going to search up the term digital humanities. Check out this, digital humanities. What am I going to find? Tons of stuff. We've got Stanford here, got Harvard here, and we've got MIT up here at the top. So let's look at what these people are doing for the digital humanities. Right, uniting the humanities and engineering with code, communication, and humanity. Building new tools for the humanities. Computational tools for solving problems to advance the state of knowledge in humanistic fields. All our code is open source and available on GitHub. All right, so there's that with MIT. There's Stanford here, digital humanities. So a lot of text analysis, interdisciplinary research. And then Harvard. Let's see what they have to say. Yeah, a lot of text analysis, computers to do data analysis, that sort of thing. So, yes, the monism, we're talking about how the technological society now, just looking at these top US universities, we could see how the technological society reaches its digital tentacles everywhere. It's not just a matter of like, oh yeah, there's hard science and it has to do with rockets, and in that sense we have technology. It's like, no, this technological society is everywhere. Okay. We have another quote here. It says, technique never observes the distinction between moral and immoral use. It tends, on the contrary, to create a completely independent technical morality. So I'm going to go to the Monism Wikipedia here really quick and look at one of the let's look at how they characterize monism. Let's see. Like this principle of like good and evil. Okay, so views contrasting monism, like metaphysical dualism here, which asserts that there are two ultimately irreconcilable substances or realities such as good or evil. So with the monism, you're saying all is one. Like there isn't good or evil, there's just the way stuff is. So this gets kind of hairy with the philosophical stuff. But let's just say here, where Jacques Ellul is asserting like technology never observes the distinction between moral and immoral use. It's not like there's a good principle and there's a bad principle. It's just technique is this one big massive thing that just is and does its thing. So that would be the sense in which it transcends morality. I don't know the technical way you would say it, but that's the claim that's being made about how the technological society, technical phenomenon is like this. All right. Then in this chapter, Jacques Ellul went into some interesting stuff about the police. So, okay, if I sound like I'm rambling a little bit here, ranting and rambling, my notes are following the various topics that Jacques Ellul was talking about in his book. So he was going all over the place, and my notes are just following his book. So if there's a disconnect, I apologize. I'll try to bring stuff together. I'm just going to close some of these windows because it's getting out of control. All right, we don't need political efficacy. Let's return to monism and look at RoboCop. Okay, so Jacques Ellul writes, the police have perfected to an unheard of degree technical methods both of research and of action. Everyone is delighted with this development because it would seem to guarantee an increasingly efficient protection against criminals. Let us put aside the problem of police corruption and concentrate on the technical apparatus. So this idea we see it a lot in modern entertainment. So I just thought of the name RoboCop, right? This idea of a partially or fully robotic police force that goes out and automatically enforces rules in society. A Japanimation iteration not too long ago is this anime Psychopaths, that has, the idea is you have these police that have access to technology and privileges that most people do not have access to, and in this big large cyberpunk world they're able to use these technologies and systems to combat crime. So these ideas continue to be very widespread and influential in our modern culture. Okay, so one thing that I found interesting when I watched this years ago, haven't returned to it for a while, is that you have the series is kind of about this system. You have this special police division that's able to do stuff, but the morality of it, it's not like these are the good guys, these are the bad guys, because you have the police that might have to kill people in a pretty hyper efficient and brutal way, and then you have people that might be resisting the system, and then some of them might seem to have sort of good motives, sort of bad motives. So it's like this whole system where you have the big police surveillance state, like you can see here on the screen, they're like monitoring people on a computer, and then you have some people that are discontent with the system. But you ask the question, like, is the system good? This huge monolithic technology society that they have set up, is it good? Are the police the good guys? Well, they're fighting these criminals that are doing bad guys, but are they any worse than the big thing in power? So all these kind of issues are presented in this series, which make it a pretty engaging, woke series. But I bring this up because it's going along this theme about the police and how if the police law enforcement becomes more effective, why is this? How is this? And one of the answers I think that Jacques Ellul offers through his work is that the expansion of police and police power has to do with the technical society technique. It's more efficient if the police are that way. So let's look at another quote here, which goes, "To be sure of apprehending criminals, it is necessary that everyone be supervised. It is necessary to know exactly what every citizen is up to know his relations, his amusements, etc., and the state is increasingly in a position to know these things." So if you've been looking at any slightly spicy topics on the internet, surely you've heard talk about freedom of speech, this sort of issue on the internet, and fear of, like, is the surveillance state getting too big? And especially now, I mean, computers are getting a lot more spooky. So I think, like, if I search computer fingerprint unlock, you know, these things are super common now. Or before, maybe you would go to an airport or something to scan your finger, and you would only do that every now and then. Now it's like using your fingerprint to unlock a computer is a very common way which modern laptops allow users to unlock their computers. So this is like one form of a biometric, something that has to do with you, your individual biology, and that's being linked to like a digital machine. So when you do like a fingerprint scan or whatever, or you log on, like I'm logged onto a YouTube account, I'm logged onto a Microsoft computer, then insofar as these accounts are secure, then when I'm doing activities online, I could be sure that at least the information is being tracked and stored, that, oh yeah, it's indeed Alan that is doing all these things, right? Like I'm not anonymous. So using this platform, like, of course I know I'm not anonymous. I'm showing my face. I'm like, all right, you guys are doing surveillance anyway, so I might as well get some benefit from it. But that's to say that this idea of increased surveillance. Why is that? Why are we living in this world? And one of the answers would be, well, it's a logical. It follows from the refinement of technique. Technique keeps on marching on. The technological society is self-augmenting. The self-augmenting technological society seeks to improve itself, increase its reach, do all this sort of stuff. And if you want to do something, for example, prevent crime, then naturally, if you collect a bunch of data, know what sort of things people do, have a lot of different ways to track people, then that'll make it easier for you to track and predict crime. So one analogy I heard is like, increasingly we're finding ourselves in a digital panopticon. So for those who aren't familiar with the panopticon, I could bring up this Panopticon by Bentham, which is, you're in, to come to think of it, this thing looks like a monad. Okay, we'll get back to that in 1 second. But, right, so there's like a watchtower. Oh, that picture's not so clear. There's like a big watchtower, and then everybody else is in these rooms around that watchtower. So regardless if there's a person in here or not, everybody has the knowledge that they could be watched. So in the same way, when we talk about like digital surveillance, that sort of stuff, it's like, if there's a Microsoft employee or a Fed, watching my stream, hey, you're people too. Like, you're welcome to watch my stream. But I don't know if they're there or not, right? But the design of the system is such that they could be there. And that's that, right? So we could see how digitally, as the technology improves and changes, then we could see this same sort of form coming up. Yeah, I said briefly that this thing kind of looks like the monad. So you have the tower, and then you have all the cells in which you could see. And then, like, okay, here's monad Pepe. Oop, wrong window. Here's monad Pepe. You see? So actually the monad Pepe is funny because the eye's in the middle, and then you see all these things around the side. In this case, it's his lips. So if he's like, you're speaking, you could see all that. And then I'll just pull up the original monad article here, the monism article. Yeah, the monism here. So it's like this monad image is kind of funny because it's like the panopticon. If this is the tower, and then you could see all this. Interesting symbols, patterns. All right. So we continue. Yeah, another way in which all this discussion is coming about police brutality. Of course, there's the whole social justice angle to it, but also looking at like, we're afraid of a Chinese-style social credit system, this sort of thing. And then in many ways, we could see how the sort of technology that goes into making this stuff, it's already in place. So like, if you use a credit card, a digital debit card, you're not using cash, then obviously tons of your transactions are already tracked and traced. So we're already primed for like digital currency that tracks everything, in the sense that, we already have credit cards and stuff which track a great deal of stuff. Okay. So looking at the chat, looks like there's no new messages so far. So I'll just continue talking about monism. I'm having a fine time doing this. So please let me know if there's any questions, comments. Otherwise, I will continue chugging along. So we have a Jacques Ellul quote here. He says, propaganda itself cannot be efficient unless it brings into play the whole state organization, and particularly the police power. Conversely, police power is a genuine technique only when it is supplemented by propaganda, which plays a leading role in the psychological environment necessary to the completeness of the police power. Okay, so thinking about current events, I thought this was a appropriate thing to bring up, because now, especially with all the talk about racism, this and that, then we're seeing a kind of maybe you could call it like a crisis of trust, public's relationship with the police. In California recently, there's been all these stories about lootings of various sorts as well. For example, these large retailers, I was looking at a story of like a luxury Louis Vuitton or something. So you have people that are looting, vandalizing, and taking all sorts of stuff from these companies, from these properties. And what's interesting is with the police power, people are like, well, they're mega corporations, they're evil billionaires. Those people actually deserve for this to happen. Like, that's one side. And then on the other side, there's other people who are like, oh no, we need to uphold justice. So it seems that just the relationship between people and police, we're all being, the media, the messaging that's going out is quite divisive. It's like, do you want people to support and want more police or less police? Or regulate the police or don't regulate the police? Like, what is the answer, right? Because, of course, if you defund the police, you do this sort of thing, then if somebody is wealthy enough and they need security, they're going to hire private security. Now, to some people, that might be good, because that will be like, all right, well, the police, they only protected the big companies anyway, so now the big companies have to pay for their own police. So I'm not here to answer or to offer answers for these particular political issues. I'm not in the authority to make any decision about it, even if I did have opinions. But that's just to say that with the discourse in the media, there's a lot of just general divisiveness and confusion being offered. And you could ask yourself, what good does that sort of messaging do to the public? How are we supposed to react to that? And one of the answers, you might say, is like, well, they just want people to be generally fearful and anxious, and then therefore easier to control. That could be one suggestion for how to start looking at that question. But just the point here is there's a bunch of talk about police and that sort of thing. And then here we have Jacques Ellul talking both about propaganda and police, and how propaganda and police, the messaging of what's happening, and then the actual law enforcement, they have long worked hand in hand as members of the same monad, members of the same technical phenomenon. All right, continuing. So then Jacques Ellul, in this chapter, he had a discussion of concentration camps. So Ellul describes the techniques of detention and re-education, and he made this move, which I would say might be politically incorrect in this day. I'll risk talking about it on YouTube, but not in its specifics, which was looking at how these concentration re-education camps was very administratively effective. So I'll just briefly describe the manner in which this is so. So if you think that a particular group of people are going to be a threat to society, so like let's say people that choose to not get a certain medical treatment, they might infect everybody, they might be very dangerous. Well, then if you have a detention, some way of detaining them, putting them all in the same place, keeping them controlled, well, then you know where they are. They're not going to be able to do much outside there. You could have guard towers, you could surround them with guns, you could do all these things. So you detain a possible threat, and then you could implement some sort of re-education. So if they have some way of thinking, some way of approaching the world that you do not like, then you could apply the strongest of your psychological technology in order to try to convince them otherwise. So we're just talking science. We're just talking technique. That's how these things would be useful. All right, continuing more. This is all from the chapter 2, the Characterology of Technique, talking about Monism. So Ellul quotes this other researcher, and he writes, De Castro declares that the new techniques of soil cultivation presuppose more and more powerful state control with its police power, its ideology, and its propaganda machinery. This is the price you must pay. Okay, so we're going full tinfoil hat here. We're going to talk about, you know, Monsanto Corporation and the poisoning of the water, and, you know, all these things. They're all related. They're all related. It's all one. It's the monad, bro. It's just the monad. Let's pull up the monad image. So talking about how all this stuff is one. All of it's the same. So let's look at this quote more closely again. So how would processes of soil cultivation presuppose more powerful state control and its police power, its ideology, and its propaganda machinery? Well, I think clearly you could see how if you centralize farming in many ways, if food production becomes something that individuals can't do, like me, where I'm just living in like an apartment, so I cannot go out and do very much farming. I'm dependent on the system, the establishment, whatever you want to call it, in order to get food to some extent. So I have to participate in the financial system and do all these things. I'm not free in that regard, right? Whereas if somebody truly, they have like a little small family farm or something like that, then they could say no. They could just reject the, you know, big technical machine if they wanted to. So we could even see how with soil cultivation, police power, all these things, they all come together as one. It's all part of the big same system. So now, for example, you probably have seen headlines and stuff about supply chain shortage. So I'm just going to search like supply chain. Let's look at Mexico and agriculture, stuff like this, and we'll probably get some headlines about some trouble in this regard. Okay, so yeah, we could pull up a couple stories from not too long ago. All right, no paywall. Okay, well, I'm not gonna try to dodge the paywall on screen, but crunch at ports may mean crisis for American farms. So as things become more globalized, you have more intricate trade networks, all these things, then one area, let's say a problem with trucking or a problem with shipping, whereas for a small family farm, this might not matter because they're independent. They just do their own little thing on their homestead or whatever. Now we have everything coming together as one big unit. So that is the monadic experience. Let us continue. Oh man, I just noticed too. So this is the panopticon. I don't even have to tell you guys what this kind of looks like. It sort of looks like a certain 3D image that has been pasted all over the place. Very interesting. Very, very muy interesante. All right, let's continue. So the technical phenomenon cannot be broken down in such a way as to retain the good and reject the bad. It has a mass which renders it monistic. Okay, so this point is saying, right, technological society, you want to produce goods more efficiently, you want all these things. Well, you have to take the whole enchilada, the whole package. So you can't just say, I want more and more nice things, but I don't want increased surveillance and police state, right? If you're going to get, like, I'll just use Windows as an example. Oh, and Windows, you know, the software just works. I don't have to configure it all myself. It's easy to install and it just works, right? Then there's the trade-offs of using Windows, like, you know, Microsoft, Google, all these parties are interfacing with your machine. Whereas if you try to hack together your own custom Linux setup, then you're not going to get a lot of the conveniences that come from just using what most people use. So in the same way, yes, looking at the technological phenomenon, right, if you want to enjoy the conveniences of living in a city, like I live in a city, hello from Sacramento, California, then I'm going to have to put up with a lot of the rules and stuff that have to do with living in the city. Whereas, right, if I choose to reject that all, you know, fewer and fewer places to run to. But if I were to do that, then I would also have to give up many of the reasons why people, conveniences and stuff, why people would live in a city like this. Okay. So I made another note here too. So sometimes when people are talking about technology, things like this, they'll be talking about progress, as in how the world's getting better in some sense. I think that this isn't quite a correct way to look at it. This Jacques Ellul text highlights some. He gives a framework to understand the manner in which it wouldn't be correct to say that. So I think a way to reframe like progressive, something like that, would be to say that how the society in general is moving more closer towards a more technical society or away from a technical society. So when we're talking about making progress in technology, it's not so much of a moral thing. It's like, this thing is amoral. It doesn't have to do with morals. The technology is there. Tools are there. Tools are just things. Techniques are difficulties you have to put up with. So we have society moving more technical. It doesn't mean it's getting better. It just means the character of the society is changing. So, like, clearly our, the World Economic Forum, Joe Biden administration, right? These people are on the side of progress, but by progress we could understand that to mean the advance of this technological society. So a more interconnected world, green energy, all these things. These will all be features of what you might call it a technological society, and whether or not that's progress, it's kind of irrelevant. We're seeing just a progression of society becoming more and more technical. All right, continuing. So, got a quote here. Ellul elaborates on how, quote, production became more and more complex, relating to his previous point of self-augmentation. Increasingly, technical systems grow themselves. Okay, so then this point that I made here, it's just, we were talking briefly about supply chains and all these things. Then you could ask a question. For example, I want to make a guitar or something like that, right? It's not a matter of going down into your backyard, cutting down the trees, using hand tools, doing all that stuff. The way in which something is produced, like a computer mouse or whatever, oftentimes you're getting different parts from all around the world. It's a very interconnected system that produces these products that we have today, as opposed to like a fruit tree and you buy some local fruit, something like that. So as production becomes more and more complex, then we could see how the demand for these more and more complex things, this leads to how the technological society is self-augmenting. As we make more and more complex arrangements, then the technological society will continue to grow. And it has within it mechanisms in order to encourage this growth. I'll say something to the retro programmers here. So we got a lot of people that look at my stuff here who are interested in like web development, programming, stuff like that. One thing that we'll talk about sometimes is this idea of technical debt. So we could look at what technical debt is. Let's look at Wikipedia. Okay, technical debt, also known as design debt or code debt, can be also related to other technical endeavors, blah, 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 is a concept in software development that reflects the implied cost of additional rework caused by choosing an easy, limited solution now instead of using a better approach that would take longer. As with monetary debt, if technical debt is not repaid, it can accumulate interest, making it harder to implement changes. Unaddressed technical debt increases software entropy, and so on and so forth. So one common thing about a lot of modern software is it's really, really hard to understand. Like if I asked you, how does Windows work? You couldn't tell me like how Windows worked. Whereas on the other hand, if I looked at like a more simple program, one popular program a lot of people might be familiar with is grep. So here is just a quick description of what grep does. Grep searches one or more input files for lines containing a match to a specified pattern. So for example, you might search a word and then the program will output the matching lines. So it might take a lot of time, but you could go study and understand grep. But if I was like, how to Windows, how to Linux, you know, there's going to be a wall, you know, a limit to how much of these extremely complex programs and things you could understand. And even more so, like one of the most complex pieces of software that all of us probably use is a web browser, like I'm showing you here. But I mean, web browsers are bonkers. Reaper says, should technical usury be banned? Oh man, you know, I am not gonna myself try to require people to use things that add to more of this. Yeah, I prefer to go simpler, but I don't think it's my position to ban it. Anyway, so these things, what I'm just showing here too, for people that aren't aware of browser stuff, like the browser's super complicated. If you study any web development, or even if you're trying to get around a paywall or just do something like that, then you'll find yourself likely looking in here, the developer console, clicking through all these things. This is like the equivalent of opening the hood of your car to see how stuff works. Well, this is opening the hood of like a website and seeing how it's connected with all the servers and all that stuff. You could pretend that you're using a phone. Simulate the phone sizes. Anyways, enough of that. The point being that like we have this idea of technical debt, and as stuff becomes more and more complicated, then you're going to need more and more specialists for different things. So if you're using like a computer, you're getting programmers, something. It could be in the past that maybe you just had a generic one type of computer nerd, because there's only so many computers and they could only do so much. Like an example might be like a typewriter person, right? If you know how to type well, and maybe some basics about fixing or troubleshooting your typewriter, and that's all there was to it, then that's that, right? But now we look at, even within a domain, like if somebody says, I do computer work, and you ask them, what exactly do you do? Well, it might be quite hard for that person to explain to you what exactly they do. My favorite explanation is to say, I'm an internet plumber. So an internet plumber, you deal with like various data pipes, where they go and all this stuff, and you might also try to fix and make the sink look pretty, or the toilet. That depends what sort of content we're talking about. All right, let's continue. So we're talking about increased complexity. So you got this monad, this just big monolithic complex structure that is one in a sense. So Ellul briefly discusses the big city as a product of technique. Increased specialization, technique of city planning, etc., combined into this thing. So the big city, you could say, is a sort of expression of the big city is an expression of what technique leads to. So let's look at some cyberpunk images. Let's look at a big city. Just get a visual. So one of the big themes in the cyberpunk stuff, which also has to do with metaverse. I'll actually search metaverse city to look at the sort of digital city that people would want to create on the metaverse. All right, so like what sort of images are people imagining? What sort of worlds would you create if you had the metaverse, this 3D AR interactive world? What would you do if you had that power? Right, so this looks pretty cyberpunk. This person shows this image of a person, all these flashing lights. Metaverse begins. NVIDIA thing. Then they have this huge futuristic mega city. I found this this interesting place. I think it's Saudi. Okay, so this is a Saudi Arabia planned mega city. that's supposed to be like a, well, showing off all these new green sustainable technologies. Oxagon. Did they rename Neom to Oxagon? Or is it still... Let's learn more. The reimagined industrial city. Bro, if you can't get your web programming to work, how are you supposed to build a city? Is web programming or city planning more complex? I'm just trying... Okay, I gotta accept all the... Let's accept all the cookies. Well, alright, so they have this city of Oxagon. Let's learn more about Oxagon. Like nowhere else on Earth, this pioneering cognitive city is a place where businesses, industries, and lives are built. Alright, it will be home to the most forward-thinking and visionary companies. Forget what you know about the polluted and congested industrial ports of the past. This is a giant leap forwards. You know, that phrase leap forward makes me a little bit nervous as a ethnically Chinese, but okay, we'll move on. Breathing new life into manufacturing, seamlessly integrating nature with technology. It will be the launch pad where moonshots become reality. It is setting for leaders and their teams to push beyond traditional boundaries, and a blueprint for the future of work, living, and sustainability. If you are an innovator at a game-changing company, this is the community you should be a part of. It's time to pivot beyond the norms. Let's change the optic on work and life together. All right, and then we got a bunch of graphics. They're showing like an electric car, some solar panels, some designing with some digital tools, some electric scooters going around a garden. And then we have a model of the largest floating structure in the world. Okay, so it looks like this Oxagon is part of the Neom project. Okay, so what is the point of showing Neom and all this stuff? This is to say, this idea of the monad, the big city. You can see how this city is a big integrated thing. Here they call it a revolution in urban living.
Contemporary cities couldn't cope with growth.
Could you cope with growth?
The contemporary city needs a full redesign.
Full redesign.
What if we removed cars? What if we got rid of streets? What if we innovated in the public space? What if we built around nature instead of over it? What if everything you needed was always a 5-minute walk away?
Okay, so once again, in this stream, we're not saying stuff's good or bad, right? We're just looking at progression, technological society. What does it look like? Here with this Neom, I think it's a good example to show what some people have as a future vision for cities. And there's a lot of things that sound nice, like you could just walk to anywhere. But then sort of implicit with that too is it's a highly integrated thing. So let's finish looking at this short promo video.
What if invisible technology generates carefree and open urban space?
So here you have like a top layer with all these trees and stuff, and then this whole network below. I mean, it literally looks like ant tunnels. So speak of the Bugman metaphor, it's like Max Bugman Dream City. But let's continue.
What if sustainability was not a goal, but a given?
Okay, so we're going to get into this topic later of, well, I guess it goes with sort of autonomy, the we had a big word. Oops, I exited the video. Oh, it's okay. We don't have to go back to the video. Anyways, we could look at these mega cities, including, like I showed this Neom city as a modern manifestation of people actually planning, gathering funds, and trying to design and build this sort of thing. Then we see this big city as a expression of the technological society and a big monad thing. Okay, so talking about this, Ellul, he had an interesting point, which I'll bring up here, regarding entertainment, which he described. And recall Ellul, guy who knows propaganda, talking about news and stuff too. What does he say about entertainment? Here's what he says about entertainment. He says, the purpose of entertainment is, quote, to make urban suffering acceptable by furnishing amusements, a necessity which was to assure the rise, for example, of a monstrous motion picture industry. Okay, so are all these pieces coming together? You could see this vision, technological society, everybody increasingly specialized, increasingly interconnected in this big sort of cyberpunk-like city. But naturally, you could see how this could be very miserable and depressing for people. So with this cyberpunk city, one of the often portrayed things about it is it's always night, it's like dark, and it's raining. So people need to escape somehow. So what is the way that people escape? Oftentimes it'll be through entertainment of some sort. And if we look at the sort of entertainment and VR type experiences that people are looking for, maybe you live in this world, but then the entertainment you do is like pretending that you're on a sunny beach or something. So it's like that Mark Zuckerberg like water race where he was chilling in VR and on surfboards. Oh, that's him on a hydrofoil. This is a different video. Okay, so this is him in real life. Let's look at him in real life. Okay, so then that's him in real life, and then we could look at Metaverse VR Hydro City. Is that what they call that game? Let's see if they show the clip in this video.
It is time for us to adopt a new company brand.
It is time for us to adapt a new company brand.
I'm trying to find that clip where he's like scooting around on, he's like meeting his buddies on like a hydrofoil thing. I don't know what it's called. Well, maybe Metaverse Game Zuckerberg. Let's try that. Okay, yeah, here it is right here.
Gaming in the metaverse is going to span from immersive experiences in fantasy worlds.
Tube City!
Kai, you're
Okay, so we saw the video of like 4th of July, Mark Zuckerberg actually on a hydrofoil.
out of control.
And then we
I'll
could
let you win
see,
next time, all good.
we could
Where
see,
are you going?
Gotta
there he
pump
is.
it to jump it.
What? I didn't know that was an option. You're not gonna catch me now. Take that, unicorn. Oh, Tube City!
Kai, you're out of control.
Don't worry, I'll let you win next time, all good. Oh, that was a close one. You wanna...
Okay, so that's enough of fun with Zuck. The point, though, here is just talking about entertainment. So we could see how these mega cities are often portrayed as very miserable, machine-like, grim metropolis-type places. I'll even search Metropolis. I think it's a film, but it might have some appropriate imagery, right? So it doesn't look like a very happy place to be living in the metropolis, this technological society place. But then if you're able to plug into some entertainment, some VR, what is it that what people will do? And then that's why I brought up like Zuck and his hydrofoil. So Zuck, powerful, rich guy and stuff, he would have the power and the ability to be able to do that in real life. But for all of us, tech slaves, then it would be our job instead to just enjoy the simulation of that. Oh, we're joined by Xali. He says, nice music. Yeah, not I didn't choose that music, but those were some pretty bopping beats. I approve. All right. So my summary of this section so far, basically, the establishment is one. You know, you might look at different sectors like, oh, it's all the bankers, oh, it's all these people. But we could see through this monism section how we have the establishment. I'll just call it the establishment now, right? The establishment is pulling all things together into one. All these different sectors, by having interconnectedness, they're all united by being part of this technological society. So monism, the absolute, there's this one thing, the one that is prior, the one that is whatever, then the one in this case will be technique. And that's the subject of this Jacques Ellul book. All right, so that concludes the first part of this stream. I'm going good. I have energy, so I'm going to keep on going. Of course, if you have any comments, feel free to drop them. You invite your friends. You know, we'll be kid friendly here too. So you know, family is okay, whatever. Let's look at this idea, universalism. All right, so before continuing, I just want to bring up this point from the general observations I made at the beginning, which is a lot of this stuff is going to have some kind of Far East religious underpinnings. And Far East, not exclusive to the Far East, like you would find this stuff in ancient Greece and other places, I think. But now we could talk about how these things are kind of Far East, and that the forms in which people would learn about or practice these ideas would be kind of Hinduism, Buddhism, New Agey type paths to look at these things. So that's why I call it Far East here. Though you could go, actually, they had those ideas in the Near East or something. Then I'm not denying or refuting that. Okay, so let's look at universalism. I'm just going to close some windows. Okay. So universalism, we have a brief definition here. It's a philosophical and theological concept that some ideas have universal application or applicability. All right. So universalism isn't to say like the world works differently for blue people than for other people. Like blue people are special and chosen, and they have a different way in which stuff works. It's rather to say there's universal in the sense that what we're talking about applies to all people. And then we have this quote here that I want to highlight here. So the Rig Veda, some South Asian sacred text states, truth is one, sages call it by various names. So oftentimes you might hear universalism discussed in the terms of like all religions being the same. So I think like there's a, I think Obama was part of a universal something Unitarian church. Let's just look at Barack Obama really quick. See what he's part of. Does it say? Search unified something. Okay. So he comes from a Protestant something. And then all these different groups. Okay, so just to talk about this idea of Rig Veda, truth is one, sages call it by very many names. You'll see a lot of world leaders, powerful people, they'll try to be universalist in the sense that they want to say like, you know, we're all one, we're all the same. There aren't real distinctions. So here, I'll just read this quote about Obama from his Wikipedia. In 2016, he said that he gets inspiration from a few items that remind him of, quote, of all the different people I've met along the way, adding, I carry these around all the time. I'm not that superstitious, so it's not like I think I necessarily have to have them on me all the time. The items, quote, a whole bowlful, include rosary beads given to him by Pope Francis, a figurine of a Hindu deity, Hanuman. So Hanuman, a Hindu god and divine monkey, companion of the god Rama. A Coptic cross from Ethiopia, a small Buddhist statue given by a monk, and a metal poker chip that used to be the lucky charm of a motorcyclist in Iowa. So you see here, it's like all is one. It's not like these people have the exclusive truth and these people don't know what they're talking about, right? The universalism is often associated with this idea that everything is really the same. It's just a different process, but there's a unity in that regard. So I bring up that sort of stuff because, as we'll see, Jacques Ellul's going to be talking about how the technical technique is this thing that unifies people. That's why he's categorizing technique, the establishment, by universalism. So let us look at a quote here, which goes, in all countries, whatever their degree of, quote, civilization, there's a tendency to apply the same technical procedures. Even when the population of a given country is not completely assimilated technically, it is nevertheless able to use the instruments which technique puts into its hands. The people of these countries have no need to be westernized. Technique to be used does not require a civilized man. Technique, whatever hand uses it, produces its effect more or less totally in proportion to the individual's more or less total absorption in it. Actually, this reminds me, I wanted to look at metaverse religion, because I saw some kind of creepy stuff about how Facebook and others were talking about yeah, look, what metaverse means for religion. Oh man, we're getting into some deep waters here. Let us. We want like pro metaverse religion articles. We don't want anti. Just so we could hear them excitedly talk about what they want to bring. Let's go to Google. We need to have a more biased search engine. Religion, and I'm going to add the word spirituality in the metaverse, because whenever somebody says that they're spiritual but not religious, let's just say that's a red flag. Okay. Okay, virtual reality church. Let's add that search. Okay, let's take a look. Let us take a look. Virtual reality and the coming Catholic metaverse. And then they made some like digital cross here. The combination of pandemic lockdowns and Zoom have spawned a new way of being Catholic. Or they have spawned a new way of seeming to be Catholic. We are moving towards a Catholic metaverse. A metaverse is a virtual world like those existing in virtual reality games such as Roblox, Minecraft, and Fortnite, where individuals exist as avatars, three-dimensional icons of themselves, so on and so forth. So it seems like, right, some Roman Catholic people are talking about what the metaverse means to them. Let's look at this other page. So the very name of this page, it says Interfaith Youth Core. This is implying some kind of universalism. because it's not saying like one faith is right, rather it's saying, you know, interfaith. There's all these different people, but in different ways they could all come together and experience the oneness, universalism, in the sense of like all is one with respect to religion. So here's a quote. Imagine attending church during Holy Week. You are not gathered in a building or even looking at Zoom squares, but joining together to walk behind Jesus as he carries the cross, standing at the foot of the crucifixion, or celebrating as Jesus rises from the tomb. Or, if you would rather, imagine yourself sitting face to face with the Buddha, listening to him explain the Four Noble Truths. Or perhaps celebrating Diwali by witnessing Krishna's victory over Narakasura, or following Moses and Miriam as they lead you and others to freedom. Welcome to the religious metaverse and what may be possible in the not so distant future. Okay, so by the Christian faith, this is complete bullshit nonsense, right? But what the metaverse is doing is presenting a way in which you're saying, like, all is one. There's all these religions. They're just different ways to experience and partake in the same reality. All these different teachings are equally valid in a sense. Whereas maybe if you talk to a more serious religious person, then they will recognize, you know, different religions claim different things to be true about the world. So you can't just say that they're all true, because believing one happens at the exclusion of others. So universalism itself, to say, you know, I believe all religions is one, then you are making a specific claim about what you think of all religions, and therefore you're saying the specific teachings of this religion I believe are false. Otherwise it would be self-contradictory. Okay, so that's just logic there. We're a little bit off topic, but that's okay. Anyways, so this was, though, is looking at universalism in the sense that you could look at the technological society, the establishment, and how in the establishment there's a place for everyone, including you. And I think that one fitting manifestation of this in the current era is the smartphone. So one thing that I've talked a little bit about on this channel is how typing in different languages is different. So I think in this window it should work if I pull up and start. So of course I'm assuming everyone here could type English. So hello, how are you? Like this. Now if I type in other languages, like I'm going to type in Greek, type some Greek letters, then I have to switch keyboard, but it's still pretty similar to typing in English. Same would be if I typed in Spanish, you know, que pasa, whatever, same. But then if I chose to type in a language like Chinese, you know, there's not enough keys on the keyboard to type all the Chinese. So I will go like ni hao, and what happens? Then you see these different candidates for the different characters come up. So when you're typing to Chinese, oftentimes you're using cloud-based software, because you're starting to type some letters and then it's guessing what words you want to type based on what other people commonly type, stuff like that. Like there's probably settings to making it offline, but that's generally how it works. And then Japanese is similar to Chinese in this respect. Now, if you look at a smartphone, the smartphone kind of brings everybody down on the same level, in that no longer is it like English on a computer. You could say it's kind of privileged that we have a button dedicated for every letter of the English alphabet when we're typing English. But then if you use Chinese or Japanese, you have to have this extra layer, extra software layer you go in. You aren't typing all the characters directly. With the smartphone, however, everybody is using this predictive type technology, assuming you're using one of those digital, like thumb typey keyboards. Because people will choose this way because it's more efficient. You could type faster with that sort of system versus if you typed out every letter. So people will opt for the more efficient technology. So the smartphone, in a way, you could see, even if let's just assume for the sake of argument that in the Western world, so English-speaking people and, you know, French, Russians, Germans, whatever, Westerners, let's say at the beginning stages, they did more to actually develop the computer technology. Now there's a kind of democratizing force, a universal thing that has happened with all of technology, such that people that speak all these different languages, write all these different languages, could interact with computers more or less the same way. Whereas in the past, it was a major hurdle, the difficulty of, say, using Japanese on a computer. Nowadays, not so much more. Because we're joined by our friend Jacques Ellul here, I'll just give a shout out to his site. One topic that Jacques Ellul has talked a lot about in various articles as well as videos is Unicode. Jacques Ellul is a Unicode expert. He's written many pages about Unicode. Is this where I find his Unicode stuff? Unicode for programmers. So like here would be a description of what Unicode is about. So he's written all these pages about Unicode. Unicode here is relevant because it's saying this technology, and the technology could only be developed through, you know, millions and millions of dollars, tons of different researchers, grant money, all this stuff, right? The technology itself, the technique, has taken its final form in something like Unicode, which allows you to not only represent all the common different languages of the world, but also represent these emojis, which you could think of as kind of universal-ish, like objects or symbols for things that people might be interested in. Right. So here we see that through the technological society, there's a kind of reversing of the Tower of Babel story. So I'm going to assume here that everybody is familiar with the Tower of Babel story. If not, go check it out. It's worth knowing about. But I'll just summarize really quick. So a lot of people in the world, they got together and they said the way that we will reach heaven is we're going to build a giant tower. And they did this for a while, and eventually God said that's not good, so the tower was destroyed, and then people were scattered and they all spoke different languages. Now what we could see is a kind of reformation, a rebuilding of Babel, in the sense that through Google Translate technology, it's like Google language translation and all these things, right? There's is coming together through technology, saying, okay, people are scattered together in all this way with the event of Babel, then why don't we bring people back together? And the manner in which people could do it might be through technology, like Google Instant Translate stuff. I didn't find what I wanted right away here, but I'm sure you get the idea. So the universalism that we're seeing with the technological society is able to, through code, through these other things, undo Babel in a sense. And this universalism aspect has to do with how this is not just for one group of people. So it's not just like, you know, the blue people, they're racist against everyone else, and the blue people are going to take over the world and dominate everybody. No, this program, the technological society, it invites all of you to join. And right, with the universalism, so here I was saying the far east religious underpinnings, it's something that's worth considering. Oops, I lost my, why am I highlighting two things at once? Okay, far east religious underpinnings, let me go back to okay, there we are. So one other thing to consider is how this relates to the science and technology of today. One big thing I'm seeing everywhere promoted as a kind of generic everybody religion is this yoga and mindfulness business. So I haven't searched this before. Let's see what happens. I'm going to search like mindfulness coding mental health. Let's search that. What's going to come up? Right. So here, there's a website literally called codingmindfully.com. Discover the power of mindfulness to make you a better developer. And then someone is selling a course about how mindfulness will do good. Like mindfulness mental health, mindfulness psychological health. Let's search like yoga computer programming. Or actually, we got to use, there's a computer called Yoga. Yoga for developers. Something like that. We need to go to Google. We can't use DuckDuckGo if we want to get the establishment recommended things. Okay, so let's see what this is about. New ebook. Okay, so like we have an article, 5 yoga poses every programmer should try, from this fellow in 2016. It's like sitting is the new smoking. So how do we solve this? Well, if programmers do yoga, then we could make the world better. Yeah, all sorts of websites. 2018, stretches and yoga poses for programmers. 5 powerful reasons coders need yoga. How yoga helped me become a better programmer. Maybe a better example would be to show how Jack Dorsey, the Twitter guy, he got all into this alternative lifestyle. Look here. In late 2017, Dorsey completed 10 days of meditation known as Vipassana. So this is getting quite popular in the West, taught by followers of, I won't try to pronounce his name. And then on his birthday, he went on a meditation trip to Myanmar. So, yes, this sort of stuff, this universalism and this Far East religion underpinnings, right? The way I'm trying to relate it is to say that you could see with the technological society, all these things, there's an active support for a particular sort of spirituality or religious view, which is a kind of universalism saying, you know, all these different paths, these paths, very different paths, but they're all essentially the same and they're all fine. So I brought up like a couple different specific examples of how that is being promoted in these days, but we could see how that particular way of talking about religion is kind of contradictory to what religions actually claim. So if you're interested in learning more about this stuff, one book I found very good was this book called Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future by Father Seraphim Rose. You could check it out if you're interested in learning more about this topic. With that being said, you know, we could see how certain sorts of religion and spirituality are promoted nowadays in the technological society, whereas others, for example, I don't think that Islamic extremism is promoted, Wahhabism, whatever it's called, and other sorts of religion aren't. So what sort of things are promoted and what sort of things aren't, and how is the line drawn for those things? Okay, cool. So let's proceed. All right, looks like Xa saw that I showed his emoji page. Yes, if you want to learn more about the technical stuff of emojis, do check out Casaw's excellent pages that talk about those. Okay, talking more about universalism. So another quote from Jacques Ellul. He says, "The number of technical slaves is growing rapidly, and the ideal of all governments is to push as fast as possible towards industrialization and technical enslavement." Whoa! Okay, so this book written 1950, like mid-20th century, but we're seeing some pretty big, intense words here. Now, look carefully at these words. Pushing fast towards industrialization and technical enslavement. So, of course, if you talk to people like, you know, you're a developing country, we need to get you towards technical enslavement. That's not going to sell to anybody, right? Like, who would run into being a slave if that's what you offered them as a world government or something? No one's going to be like, oh, yes, I welcome slavery under you. People will say, you know, I want opportunity, I want freedom, I want these sorts of things. That's not going to sell. So you have to look at how this sort of system is sold. And that's where the technical aspect comes in. So if we look at, like, I don't know, let's look at the, let's look at what the G7 people, what did they say at the G7 summit? How does the G7 summit present their aims and goals? So we have an establishment party here with the G7 from the UK, US, got some people here. The news of President Biden visiting the G7. G7 shorthand for Group 7. So we got some powerful people here from 2017. And what do? They meet each year for a summit to discuss pressing issues on the global stage and coordinate policy. International security and the world economy are often topics of discussion. The recovery from the C-19 thing is expected to dominate this year's meeting, understandably. Okay, what power? Wasn't what I was looking for. I wanted to hear more about what they discuss. So policies, we're doing stuff, right? So what are the things that they're trying to do? Here it says they're trying to support a global pandemic radar, a new global surveillance system intended to protect immunization. Oh man. Okay, yes, let's bring in a new global surveillance system. Sounds very technological society. All right, taxes, sales, stuff like that. I think maybe it would be more of the IMF. Let's look at the IMF website, the International Monetary Fund. I'm trying to look for an example of like plans to help develop countries, and what does it mean for a country to develop. So actually, I'll just search up like developing country. Let's see how this is defined. Okay, let's go check out this. What is a developing country? No universal definition. Okay, overall, tend to have significantly lower economic and social indicators, so data, than developed countries on average. The United Nations Human Development Index, or HDI, is the most comprehensive measure of a country's development, integrating both social and economic measurements. Okay, so how would people talk about a country being a developing country? So GNI, per capita gross national income. So they're measuring money in some sense. Might have to do with international finance, loans and all that, but we won't get too much into that. Okay, industry and urbanization. Look at this. There are other economic factors that can be used to distinguish between a developing country and a developed country. For instance, developing countries tend to have more people and their labor forces working in primary industries like agriculture and mining. So working directly with, I think that's working directly with the earth, something like that. Let's see what a primary sector. Okay, production and retrieval of raw materials. Then the secondary industries, transforming those materials. So if we're talking about like who does work directly with the earth, and then the layers and layers and layers on top of that, until we get to the quinary sector. The professions of these people are considered or referred to as gold collar professions. So they're like highest level management. So you go from directly working on the ground, and then you go up and up and up through more and more layers of bureaucracy. Right. Okay, so going back to this article, if you just told people, do you want to become technical slaves? Who would run to sign up for that? Now, on the other hand, if we tell people in the so-called first world that there's all these people that are in the developed world, and look, they don't have nice technology like us, how do we help them? How do we push them towards being a developed country like us? Then that is the idea that we see here. If you make an industrialized society, then you turn people from just, farmer, miner, whatever, into a technical slave. You become locked into a technological society as opposed to your normal way of sustenance that you were doing before. Okay. So let's continue. So talking more about the universality stuff, Jacques Ellul talks about how technical invasion. So you have certain technological societies, like maybe more in the West, Europe, United States. Then how do you get this system to stretch to other places of the world? Like, I think still we have the impression, for instance, that we'll use the term like look at the developed country way to look at it, right? Certain countries are more developed than others. What we call a developed country would be like the United States or somewhere, a place that is more of a technological society versus these other countries that aren't as penetrated by that system. Then what you need to do is you need to have technological invasion to get them. Countries. Oh, this is just a list. I need like a more better grouping of them. Okay, might have to look at this later. I'll close this window. Right. So the manner in which you could have developed nations through technical invasion, Jacques Ellul is commerce and war. So how might that look in our modern era? For instance, you might hear talk about free trade, right? So if somebody is against free trade, they might not want interference of, the IMF or whatever. But if you phrase it as like, oh yeah, we could all be enriched if we're all connected, we need to promote free trade, then that's one manner in which you could have this technical invasion. And we can see historically, yes, the technological society, as it started and as it evolved, a lot of people didn't want it. So for example, in Japan famously was closed for a while. And then a Brit showed up at the door. So that would be the Perry expedition. Kurofune Raiko, arrival of the black ships. And an 1854 depiction. So all these ships showed up on Japan shores. And then soon thereafter, the Tokugawa shogunate gave way to the Meiji era. So the Westerners, they showed up and they wanted to do trade, regardless if the Japanese wanted that or not. Now we could see different forms in which the same sort of stuff is happening. Like one interesting issue that's happening now is Chinese colonization of Africa, which we might look more into in this stream. But this has, especially within the past, I don't know, 5 or so years, been happening a lot more. So here we have like a Indian site that's talking about it. Anyways, let us just say that stuff like the Chinese colonialism in Africa, things like this, often the vector by which this will come will be trains and infrastructure. So if I search like Chinese infrastructure in Africa, I'll probably get a bunch of hits that are talking about China building stuff in Africa. Yeah, so here's a couple examples. Oh, Deloitte got a big company here. We'll accept the cookies. So title, if you want to prosper, consider building roads. China's role in African infrastructure and capital products. And then all this economics jargon about economic development, the good old 经济发展, and how China is building all sorts of stuff in Africa. So some industrial workers here. So what's the point of bringing up all this infrastructure and talking about the development? So if we talk about, okay, now in the United States or wherever you are in the world, assuming people listening to this are coming from these already developed countries, if you're watching a YouTube video or YouTube live stream, then maybe that's not a good assumption. I'm just assuming. You live already in a technological society, but we can see how the technological society expands to other places, oftentimes through commerce. And then if commerce doesn't work, then actively, you could do war. But commerce and war often come together. It's like, hey, do you want to free trade? No, if someone doesn't want a free trade, then you might have to take out the current powers that be, and then you could have a more favorable arrangement there. All right, so let's continue here. All right, so then Jacques Ellul had a pretty woke quote here, which I'll read. He says, the phenomenon of present-day decolonization, so present day for him, mid-20th century, is closely related to the possibilities of the technical development of peoples who, up to now, have lived in symbiosis with colonial powers. From the moment of independence, in quotes, these people are constrained to appeal for assistance to the two major powers. After all, they cannot possibly be self-sufficient on the technical plane. So, in the news and stuff, you look around, you'll probably hear about all sorts of technical, all sorts of independence movements. Now you could ask, if a state is like independent politically, what exactly does that mean, right? And a lot of times when we're talking about quote-unquote independence, it's going to have to do with the manner in which you're connected to other powers, how you're connected. So, for instance, one hot topic for a lot of people of Chinese ethnicity is like issues of Hong Kong and Taiwan and all of these. Now, personally, I'll be sharing some of my opinions as I talk about this. Like we'll take Hong Kong for example. So if you're Hong Kong and then you had a favorable economic status under the British, whereas like mainland China was under a different government, communist China or whatever, yeah, I mean, it makes sense if Hong Kong would still like to continue to enjoy their favored status that they had under the British. Nobody is going to blame them for wanting that. But is there like a moral imperative? Do they have some kind of right for that? Or is it they enjoyed this convenient relationship and now that the terms of that are over? To me, I'm not morally outraged by what's happening politically with like, oh, Taiwanese independence, Hong Kong independence. I don't think that that's a good thing. I 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 think that that's a good th mainland China, oh, when mainland China split up, Macau, like all this, I do not really have much of an opinion about it, because I just see that you have different parties with different interests of how they want to choose their paths of development, so to speak. So it's just like the system marches on, and me having an opinion about it, it doesn't change anything. Of course, I think if you like murder people or something, that's wrong because murder's wrong, but it's not because, like, I'm not going to say the Taiwanese government is more righteous than the Chinese government or something like that. Like, I don't know. So here, though, it's talking, Jacques Ellul is talking about how even if a country becomes nominally independent, so let's pretend like Taiwan is able to become its own country. What will that mean? Maybe it'll just become the sole semiconductor factory for the United States. So now it'll be their role, instead of being threatened by China, is they're the United States special factory or something like that. And then then South Korea, maybe then South Korea won't like that, because they'll say, oh, we have Samsung and we're kind of competing over that. And it's just all these different parties with these different concerns. Different people want to make more money and all this. But in what sense would they be more independent? For me, like, I can't really say how, if Taiwan was formally granted independence, maybe some rules regarding travel with passports or something like that. I'm not really sure, but to me, I don't really understand. Besides saying, like, oh yeah, we're our own country, take that. Like, what does that mean? In what sense are you more free? So that's my own personal view on some of these East Asian topics, and I'm sure some people feel strongly about these things, but I don't feel strongly about them for those reasons that I said, that it's kind of just machinations of stuff that I don't really have anything to do with. So we could understand and know the rules. For example, if you wanted to travel, you have to know the rules about where you are and aren't able to travel. But, I don't get to decide these things. Okay. So looking at the world today and seeing how the technological society expands, you could look at organizations that have to do with trade and money, like the IMF, getting everyone banked. You might hear about the, like, unbanked populations. And then also, too, if you look at sort of global health initiative type stuff. Because a lot of the times when we're talking about global health expansion and these sorts of things, it's very, very tied up with information. People talk about, like, oh yeah, well, if we don't know who everybody is and have these records and have all these data, then how could we give you health care? So oftentimes when we see quote-unquote health care being expanded, what's happening with that is the expansion of the technological society. That's just how it works. Okay. So continuing, we have a quote here from Jacques Ellul. He says, "There is no doubt that all the traditional cultures and sociological structures will be destroyed by technique before we can discover or invent social, economic, and psychological forms of adaptation which might possibly have preserved the equilibrium of these people and societies." Okay, so here we're talking again about universalism. So one of the effects of universalism, too, is that when you include everybody, then everything kind of becomes the same as well. If you say all religions are one, then if all religions are one, then how are they religions even different? They're all one. You smash everything together. And you can see manifestations of how that sort of procession of thought, I don't know what to call it, how that pattern works with respect also to stuff like language, culture, food, external things. So I'll return once again to the aesthetics of the cyberpunk stuff. Gotta close some windows. Close some windows. So if we look at some cyberpunk imagery again, then we'll see a bunch of Asian stuff. It's one of the recurring themes. So here, then we got some Asian characters here. Like Japanese, Chinese. Sometimes nowadays the Korean stuff is popular as well. Anyways, one of the points though I'm trying to make by showing all this stuff is there's this image of a very global, it's global in the sense that you have the different appearance of different cultures, like you have these different signs, but then on the other hand, all sorts of stuff is the same, right? So if you have a localization of a website in a bunch of different languages, but it's all selling the same sort of products, and then you could buy the same sorts of products wherever you go, at whatever shopping mall in any major city is all basically the same, then there you have it sort of universalization, and the differences that remain between everything is very superficial. It's just like, you know, a food from this culture, a food from that culture, and we could all eat these foods, but where are the actual differences between different groups being distinguished? So like another word for this sort of thing could be a kind of Disneyification. So one thing that Disney is doing is they're trying to be more quote unquote inclusive and have like Disney princesses from different cultures. So let's just look Disney princesses list. We could see who the latest ones are. All right, let's go to DisneyPrincessFandom.com. Let's see what's here. All right, so we got every Disney princess under the rainbow. All right, and the official ones. So historically, right, Mulan, but then we get some more recent ones. So I think this person, Tiana, the first African-American Disney princess, and then she becomes, I don't know where these fictional places, or maybe not fictional, well, whatever. Anyway, she's like New Orleans, so American, African-American. All right, then they got their ginger, like Irish something, Moana Island or something. And then recently, yeah, I think they made some different Asian, some like, what was that movie? Like Raya Dragon something, Raya movie. They made their like, might not have been, oh, it was Disney. Okay, well, so they made their like Southeast Asian person. Anyways, the point of bringing this up, Disney princess stuff, is if we look at universalization, right? And there's a sense in which Disney is being more universal, in that they're showing more different Disney princesses and stuff that are different colors, that come from different backgrounds. But then you could ask, how different are they really? In what aspects are they, like, do they have different beliefs? Or how do their personalities differ? All these sorts of questions you could look into. But in essence, I think a lot of it just seems to be this whole kind of skinning or theming thing of various cultures. So there's nothing like, if you eat takeout Chinese food every day, does that make you more Chinese? I would say no, not really. I mean, like, everyone's got to eat food every day. Likewise, if a Chinese person eats like Mexican food every day, do they lose the essence of their being Chinese? I would say no. I mean, maybe a little bit, but not. To me, it just doesn't seem particularly important. Anyways, you get a big international company like Disney or something, and they have their own values, their own ideas that they want to present, their own, their entertainment company, whatever you want to call them, and they universalize basically on this skin, this outer level. And yeah, that's the universalism of the technological society, the form that entertainment takes, could be very revealing. See, another thing we see here I haven't noticed, this hybridization of everything. So even like, I think what's his name in the Matrix, Keanu Reeves, is he like half Asian or something? It's like, where is he from? Born in Lebanon, mother is English, and his American father from Hawaii, native Hawaiian, Chinese, English, Irish, and Portuguese descent. So it's like Keanu Reeves, the guy who represents, you know, the future man. He's in the Matrix. That's why I bring him up. Then he comes from this very, very mixed ancestry. Another, we could look at the Bond villain, Dr. No. This Bond villain is, I think he's supposed to be like half German and half Chinese or something. Anyways, we don't have to get into the specifics. The point being that there's part of the universalization too, is this whole hybridization. Because you could say if the differences between people are just skin deep, and then you could just have a new avatar, change stuff up, do all that sort of thing, then really what's the difference between different people? It's you could come up with more different combinations. You could have blue people, like let's invent new languages and new cultures, right? So you universalize things. You say we can include everybody, and then you could even make up new groups as well that don't even exist. And what's to say that this new hybrid group, or even a fictional group, is not as like valid as the historical groups? Because if you're forming the rules and you're making stuff up yourself, well, you know, you're making the rules. So that's that. Okay, so going forth from this universalism idea, a couple more spicy quotes. Here's one. It says, up to the time of Western intervention, life on the Asian continent was highly stable. Populations and environments were in equilibrium. Of course, things were far from being perfect. Undernourishment, for example, was always a danger, but certain civilizations were harmonious enough. Some of them endured much longer than our own. Everyone, I believe, agrees that the tribulations of modern Asia stem in part from the complexity that the West has imposed on it, the complexity and density of structure provoked by the indispensable applications of technique. So here, I think, Asiatic continent, this is talking not just about East Asia, but about like South Asia, so India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, all these different places. And their societies weren't as technological for a long time, but they had huge populations, so they had to have some kind of social order. It wasn't just like they were completely primitive dum-dums that didn't know anything, but they would be distinguished from, say, the United States in that they were not as technologically advanced. Technically, they didn't have enough going for them. So when the technological society was brought to them, then here Jacques Ellul describes it as tribulations of modern Asia from the complexity that the West has imposed on it. So interesting point here to think about and to look about is, right, technological society, things like this or that. Jacques Ellul is descriptively talking about how it comes to places and then it's like this all-consuming thing that just gobbles everything up. But in what sense is it progress? So obviously it's progress on its own terms of the technique that technology is developing. But like now in China, for instance, there's all this talk about social harmony in China. You could ask the question, does more technology, things like this, does it actually bring more social harmony to China? or was actually China more socially harmonious in the past? So from this Jacques Ellul quote, it's suggesting that, you know, at the time he was writing it, in the past, China or Asian civilization more broadly was more socially harmonious. Yet in the current era, right, we see in Asia a continual push to still try to get social harmony going. So even as the form of the society takes more technological innovation and stuff, then similar goals are coming forth from maybe, you know, inherent things with the people group, that the people, they still have these values that they go for. I don't really know what to make of that. So just bringing up that term, social harmony in China, and then looking at how that relates to technology. All right. We've been going for a while, but we could keep on going. Another quote: technicians have not willed this outcome. No one seeks consciously to destroy a civilization. This is simply the proverbial collision between the earthenware pot and the iron pot. What happens happens despite the best possible intentions of the iron pot. Okay, so here Jacques Ellul is talking about the technological society as being the iron pot, and it's just more efficient. It's just a harder, stronger pot, so you smash it against the earthenware pot, then like it'll crush the earthenware pot. So as universalism, it's an interesting way to talk about it. It's to say, okay, in all cases, the technological society is more powerful and able to steamroll over other things, to totally overpower other things. So what happens, happens, right? So even if you don't want to disrupt, say, traditional African societies, when you bring all the developed nation stuff to Africa, you're going to crush the pot, so to speak. Yeah, interesting. So I'll just bring up, like, so from my own background, as I said, I've come from a linguistics background. I think one of the ways a lot of people get interested in languages and linguistics is they hear about all these different languages of the world, and they could be endangered languages, for instance. So I'll bring up endangered languages. Let's take a look at this. So here we have a web page for endangeredlanguages.com. So this whole website is like 3,453 languages. So all these languages, like here, a lot of these are probably Native American languages because, you know, I haven't spoken a Native American language with anybody. All these languages are getting steamrolled over. So a lot of people, I think, they get into a field like linguistics because they learn about and they're concerned with endangered languages. Similar, you could say, to like how somebody might get into biology because they see some cool animals and they're interested in conservation. So they're drawn into academics or whatever because they see the beauty of something like different languages or different animals, something like that, and then they want to protect that or document it to do something like that. But then you have to deal with the the iron pot of the technological society, whereby you and your influence, you go into somewhere, you will probably steamroll and stomp over that thing that you're that you're trying to learn about. So for me, this was a kind of paradox that was interesting to me, where, for example, let's say I want to study a language. Let's say I want to study Cambodian. So oftentimes, like, the way in which I would be able to go to Cambodia might be as an English teacher. This is the way in which a lot of Westerners are able to go to other countries to study and stuff. So it's not hard, for instance, to find a lot of Westerners who have gone to Japan to study, to teach English, gone to South Korea to teach English, something like that. But what's happening is when you're doing this, you are coming through the technological society apparatus. So if it's really like Korea or whatever you're looking at that you think is this beautiful, precious place that you want to see flourish and stuff, then you yourself come as an arm of the technological society, an arm of the machine. And you know, of course, you could be sensitive of the people there and do the best that you can, but the sort of people that you're going to meet, right, they're there to learn English. They're there to learn the technique, to become part and make their society transform to be more and more technical. All right. So when technique expands, iron pot, clay pot, stuff breaks, things happened. So I wrote a couple notes here. So agency and responsibility is spread out such that nobody takes responsibility for harm that is done. So, I mean, I could even look at, like me, for instance. I'm Chinese American, but I've only studied Chinese as a second language. And is it anybody's fault? I mean, no, it's not really anyone's fault, and nobody owes me to like have taught me Chinese or anything. So it's fine, but it's just the system rolled out in a particular way such that I was born in the United States, and globalization, this and that, that's just how it is. All right. And then the second note I had here was, who does the establishment, i.e. the technological society, villainize? So this is important, I think, to recognize that, like, if you say, I'm going to go and teach English in Japan or something, then generally you are perceived as a cosmopolitan type of good person, good guy. Wow, you're interested, you're going to go out and learn more about the world, and so on and so forth. Go into a different place. A lot of people from educated backgrounds especially, they'll feel very good about doing that sort of thing. Now, who would be the sort of people that the establishment would not like? And I think it would be a lot of the times people who go against a sort of universalism. So if you want to be exclusive to any extent, like let's just say you have a club and you're like, yeah, in this club this sort of person cannot join or something. Or even like if you had a religious organization and you had some sort of criteria for exclusion, then stuff like this, I think oftentimes the technological society does not like that, because the technological society wants to be universal, to be all-encompassing. So if you said, like, I only trade with these sorts of people, then that would be a no-no. Okay, continuing. Checking the chat. Looks like there's no new chat messages, but still a lot to say, so we're going to chug right along. A quote. Cloud Munson forcefully demonstrates that psychological technique, as it operates in the army or in a great industrial plant, entails a direct action on the family. And then I skipped like a sentence or two. Technique can leave nothing untouched in a civilization. Everything is its concern. So once again, we're under this subtopic of universalism as it applies to the technological society. And from my own experience, I could see many ways in which this is so. So Asian Americans have often been called the model minority because by model minority, they do what the establishment wants. Basically, like Asian Americans are known for their high academic achievement. Like a lot of Asians will score high on standardized tests, go to big universities, work for large corporations, become professional doctors, lawyers, pharmacists, this sort of thing. You know, these are all stereotypes that are very common. You could find endless discussion of these sorts of things. So, in a way, you could say that being a model minority is being a maximum establishment bugman. So it's like, if you're a model minority, what might that mean? It might be that more so than other groups, you are willing to give up your entire social culture, your entire being, to let somebody else determine that for you, someone or something else. So this quote I thought was interesting. So, for example, the family, how might you optimize your family for the establishment? So one way that people might do this, for instance, it's like if a family says, we want to have fewer children. Why do you want to have fewer children? Well, we need to be able to put money into the children for the sake of education. Something like that would be saying, right, we're limiting our family size. We're making our own like personal decision in order to fit to this bigger thing. That would be a way that people are doing it. Likewise, you might have a couple who says, like, we're not going to have children, or like they choose not to. And what might be the reason why? Well, it could be because they want to enjoy all the things that the technological society has to offer them. So they're going to save more and more of their resources to invest in themselves, the security, and their place in the technological society, rather than procreate, which will mean that, you know, you're going to spread out what you have more. All right. So I think there's a lot more to be said at that, but I'm just going to keep on going. I'm not getting any comments coming through right now, so I assume we're going fine, or there's no audience to displease, one or the other. But a lot of topics for future streams, so I'll just keep on going. Another quote here. Our technique, which is destroying all other civilizations, is more than a simple mechanism. It is a whole civilization in of itself. Okay, so going off this blurb I just made about Asian Americans, technique itself has to offer some kind of alternative. Like, you can't just say a person has no culture, because if there's a void, something will fill it. So what is the thing that fills the void? It would be the technological society. So for example, I gave like saying, how might family structure be altered by the technological society? Well, if you shape the size, the form of your family in order to match this new thing, then right, that would be saying by respecting the demands and stuff of this particular system, you therefore constrain the form of your family, for instance. Anything else like music, right? If you listen to the popular music that is given to you, you find values and stuff from the literature that is popular, from the movies, from these sorts of things, then the technique goes in and it replaces and takes over what previously would have been occupied by something else. So I'll go over to my website and show an image that I made a while ago. This is my website. Okay, so like I made this image and at least one viewer of this stream got a kick out of it. So I bring it up again because it's relevant. So I titled this is Your Brain on Personal Computing. And for example, with this MacBook, I called it Manufactured Tribal Loyalty. So I made this like long ago, years before I'm doing this, when we're talking about Jacques Ellul. But you could see how like you could have these manufactured technological things which take the place of what would normally be a culture or even a family. So instead of consulting people, you know, finding wise, knowledgeable people, if everybody could just turn to Google to find their answers, then, you know, what does that mean? What does that represent? If you're looking for something interesting to hear, for some interesting art, if instead of like playing your own music, exploring your own things, or having your own friends, you just plug in something that's given by a megacorp or something, then yeah, that's what you bargain for. And of course, you could have your phone and your stuff that are tracking you, rather than just telling people like, oh, I'm going here, meet me here, and so on and so forth. All right. So if we're looking at what form like if we're talking about what will like a one world government or a new world order, what will that look like? You know, Ellul is basically spelling it out in the technological society. All these things that we're already seeing around us, like these are patterns that you could say will just be expanded. They will go to more places, and we'll see the things that are big now. You know, they might go under a different name, but the patterns, the patterns that are working, they're being empirically discovered. Lots of things are being tried, and then the patterns that are most effective are being discovered. And that would be the development of technique, the development of technology. All right. Kind of a long mouthful quote, but it had a lot of content, so I'll read this. Technical civilization means that our civilization is constructed by technique. We can see that this is actually the case in certain phenomena considered essential to a civilization. For example, art and literature. These activities in modern society are tightly subordinated in different ways to technical necessities by the direct interference of technique. Take, for example, the motion pictures, radio, and television. These media require great capital investments. As a result, artistic expression is subordinated to a censorship of money or of the state. This censorship most often takes the form of indirect influences, which again may assume different guises. Personal music is supplanted by the radio, and painting, threatened by photography, is obliged to modify itself by becoming abstract, so as not to be a mere substitute for reproduction. Modern art and literature manifest at all points their subordination to the technique, which has extended its power over all activity and hence over all culture. So here Jacques Ellul is just talking about how technique, right, if it's steamrolling over and like winning over competing other cultures, how does it do it? Well, it's going to supply its own substitutes for what the cultures in the past would have themselves. Then the technological society, it just doesn't leave you with nothing. Instead, it will provide a kind of substitute. So, whereas people might enjoy a lot of different art, then lo and behold, there will be more art for you to enjoy, art for you to look at. So photographs is one of the things that it mentions. And then here there's also this interesting point where if making a realistic image isn't going to be interesting anymore, so I'll just search up the term, like Dutch realism. The Dutch people got quite advanced at these techniques of painting really carefully rendered, intense images. Can I view a bigger image? Where is Wikipedia when I need it? Okay, well anyways, the point is that the Dutch and other people got really good at producing these realistic images. Now, what's being suggested here by Jacques Ellul is that with the advent of photography, so a technique for producing a particular sort of images, then all the training and massive amount of time that would have to go into do stuff like produce realistic images, then suddenly, you know, producing a realistic image is just something that could be done by a machine. The machine could like virtually automate this process. So people will have to do other things that don't look like photographs. And our current manifestation of this, oh man, that is the infamous corporate art, which is starting to gain all sorts of attention. We'll have to talk more about corporate art some other time of this stream. But these images, clearly they aren't realistic, right? So why would you show them? Well, it's representational in some way, like all this abstract art, corporate art. Why, of all the images to show, would you show these things? Why, right? It doesn't look like a photograph. I think that's one of the key things. Yeah, just to highlight a couple of features. Oftentimes the people have like these tiny heads and they have little or no features. Okay, once again, we need to have Google. Let's have Google show us the corporate art, not DuckDuckGo. So people parodying it, making fun of it. But yeah, a lot of people hate it. But you'll see it everywhere. Just spend a little bit of time on the internet. You'll find it. But oftentimes, unlike a photograph where like a person's facial features will be the way in which you distinguish different people, then you could see a key feature for this big tech art style is like very little heads or few features. Let's try big tech art instead of corporate. Yeah, you could imagine seeing this thing like as an image to promote a corporate party. You'll have diversity, lots of different skin tones, things like that. Skin tones that don't exist. So I was talking about like hybridization, how all the ethnicities or culture, whatever, it's just variations on the same thing. Well, the appearance of purple or pink or blue people, that's like an expression of that, in that there are no ethnicities or like people that look like that, yet in this world, the technological society world of the 21st century, then these people kind of become the fill-in to say like anybody could be you, black person, brown person, blue person, purple person, right? It's all the same. Cool. Okay, let's continue. Okay, so I had my own note here that I wrote. I said, one reason I think that sci-fi is popular is that through sci-fi, you could talk about like what is technology doing to society and so on and so forth. It's kind of meta, right? It's like telling the story of what technology is doing through using high-tech stuff. Because to make a successful science fiction thing, you're going to need all sorts of special effects and things. And technology is one of the key themes in science fiction stuff. It's like, what would the world look like, or what possibilities are there because of such and such technology? So I think that the sci-fi genre, it's very popular, whether in film, television, literature, whatever, and I'll include like cyberpunk type stuff in that, is because as we're showing throughout these many streams, like all this stuff is happening to us. This is the culture that is being used as the iron pot that smashes the clay pot that's supposed to steamroll over all sorts of stuff. So sci-fi is able to talk about these things, and I think it's not surprising that's why sci-fi is quite popular, because people could connect with, understand, and discuss the themes that are put forth in science fiction. All right, another quote. So we're still talking about universalism and how the technological society has as one of its key features this universalism principle, and that anybody, everyone, you have your place in the technological society. So the quote goes, geographically and qualitatively, technique is universal in its manifestations. It is devoted by nature and necessity to the universal. It could not be otherwise. It depends upon a science itself devoted to the universal, and it is becoming the universal language understood by all men. We need not belabor the fact, which everyone recognizes, that science is universal, and this fact in turn leads of necessity to the technical universalism which stems from it. So let's see. In what sense is this a universal language understood by all men, all people? Obviously, we would say that it's not universal in the sense that, like, we have computers everywhere, but is everybody a computer programmer? Like, clearly not, right? Is everybody an expert surgeon, robot operator? No. So it's not universal in that everybody understands what's going on specifically of what everyone else is doing. But we could talk about how it's universal in that this, like, the expansion of technique, the expansion of the technological society will go to everybody. And like everybody now has to have like an email account, whatever, this sort of idea. In that sense, the universal language is everybody being subjected to the same technological society. All right. Some more quotes. Jacques Ellul writes, "Technique alone is rigorously objective. It blots out all personal opinions. It effaces all individual and even all collective modes of expression. Today, man lives by virtue of his participation in a truth become objective. Technique is no more than a neutral bridge between reality and the abstract man." So I would say here, by rigorously objective, right, if you take measurements, you take data, you count stuff, then you could say that, you know, by my metrics, by a test or a criteria that I set up, this thing is better than this thing. So if I, like, let's use the example of realistic drawing or artwork, for example. If I have a camera and I take pictures of something, then I could say, oh yes, the camera accurately captures XYZ, it finds all these forms, it accurately represents them. Whereas me, if I try to do a drawing and I do the same thing, it could be like you only get a score of 30% out of 100. So the camera is objectively better than me in the sense of it more accurately represents that specific thing that we are drawing. So in the same way, you could say like, what is the best sort of restaurant? It's like, well, let's measure best restaurant by, you know, customer satisfaction and units of whatever sold. Then there is a real science, you could say, to optimizing for the most, whatever metric it is that you're trying to optimize for. So, yeah, here, technique is no more than a neutral bridge between reality and the abstract man. So I would say that what's meant here by the abstract man, right? The abstract thing that you're doing is you're making a model of how stuff works, and then you're optimizing for something. So if I'm like, what is the best computer user? And then you make up a model of what the best computer user is like, then you could come up with an optimal training program in order to produce that person as described by your model. So it's objective in the sense that you could make up standards and then measure stuff up to how they answer to those standards. But then, of course, this begs the question, you know, on what standards are you making up your own standards? So I had a comment here, which is truth, as it's being discussed here, doesn't become incarnate in the form of a man. Rather, in the technological society, it materializes as an impersonal machine. Made a typo, I'm just fixing now. Right. So the point I'm making here is, like, there's a lot of talk here about how the technological way is like the best way. So in what sense is it the best way? Well, it would be, once again, going back to how you're measuring the results. How do you say one model is better than another model? So like for a factory, it could be, you know, efficiency in production, how much it costs to put in these units, and so on and so forth. So the technological society, it comes out not looking like a person, right? It's all these machines, these programs, this thing, this principle, and it doesn't look like a person. So where's Monad Pepe when I need him? So here's Monad Pepe again, right? Monad Pepe doesn't look like a frog. Monad Pepe is like these abstract forms, like a circle and a dot. But perhaps, you know, writing mathematical code, I could write a program that would generate Monad Pepes much more efficiently than the effort that would go into creating all sorts of like natural Pepes. There's a sense in which that which I'm showing right there, right now, it is more efficient. I don't know the correct way to put it, but it's a thing that isn't like a person. It isn't a frog, whatever it is that would be an imperfect, inefficient thing. Rather, it's something that you could generate with like formulas efficiently to generate circle code, whatever. Simple geometric forms, something like that. Okay, let us continue. Another quote, which I'll read. Technique is of necessity, and as compensation, our universal language. It is the fruit of specialization, but this very specialization prevents mutual understanding. Everyone today has his own professional jargon, modes of thought, and peculiar perception of the world. There was a time when the distortion of over-specialization was the butt of jokes and a subject of vaudeville. Today, the sharp knife of specialization has passed like a razor into the living flesh. Okay, so then this quote is showing how, yes, the universal is that there's specialization everywhere. So it's kind of ironic in a way, right? Where we're all universally sharing in the same condition under the technological society, in that everybody is kind of having to become a sort of specialist. And what is one of the results of this? So we could look at nowadays, a common phrase that we heard for a while was the so-called like trust the experts. So what is trust the experts about? I think in many ways it's a very good revealing manifestation of the technological society, because it's to say, what do you know about? You know, you only know about your job of assembling little widgets here, but those people, whether they're controllers of the economy, people in charge of public health, the assumption is that these people, they're experts in their domain, so they know better than you. So you don't get to make a decision yourself for whatever we're talking about it, but they get to make the decision for you. And it isn't like, well, yeah, but shouldn't I be free to consult them and take their advice or not? No, you don't get to do that in this sort of society, because if you were to do that, then it might be inefficient. It might be bad for society as a whole. So quit being selfish, you little bigot, fall in the line. So that would be one example how specialization and universalism is applied in the modern era. All right. So that concludes my notes on this section of universalism. So just do a quick recap. Monism, right? This is the idea that all is one, capturing this idea that you have to take the whole package. So you have a technological society. You can't just have the benefits of technology. You also have to take everything that comes with it, including everyone becoming more specialized, a hyper-efficient police force with surveillance. You've got to take the whole package together. That was the idea of monism. Then the idea of universalism here was a characteristic of technique as being applied to everyone, everywhere. And here too was a description of how when you have the technological society contact another civilization, the technique is just so overpowering. The image or example that Ellul gave was the iron pot versus the clay pot. It'll just kind of smash up the clay pot, and this isn't really a moral problem for anybody. That's just how it works, because one is more efficient than the other. So finally, we're going to get into this last section, which is autonomy, and things get pretty spicy here. So buckle in. Looks like we don't have any new comments in the chat, but that is okay. We will continue. So, what is this idea of autonomy? The word or phrase that Jacques Ellul used is it is a closed organism. So, like with people, for example, you and I, we're probably relatively autonomous from each other. You don't live under my roof, so I don't like tell you, can you go buy me groceries or whatever. Likewise, you don't ask much of me. We're all free agents, and we're not depending on each other. Assumption, you know, we all are interconnected in many ways, but just in a pretty material, local sense, we're not. Okay. So a closed organism, right? It's like self-contained, it does what it does. So let's look at a quote here from Jacques Ellul. It says, "The police must be independent if they are to become efficient. They must form a closed, autonomous organization in order to operate by the most direct and efficient means and not be shackled by subsidiary considerations." All right, so it's true, right? If a police group or something, they don't have any supervision, they don't have oversight, they could just do stuff. Now, who does this sound like to you? So I put a note here. What are feds? And the second question I have is, does this sound democratic to you? So, you know, recognize, you know, with police, federal agents, stuff like this, these aren't people that you choose or you elect. So once again, I'll bring up the concept of political efficacy. So if you don't believe that you know, you could change much with respect to the police or anything like that, then which enforce, you know, political agendas and influence civil society, this sort of thing, then it's, yeah, your political efficacy is pretty low. Now, why would this not be something that people in power would want you to discuss? And this will go again to what we mentioned in this stream about the purpose of entertainment, right? You don't want people to be thinking about rebellion and stuff. Let me find entertainment. Let's see. Right, so urban, yeah, ease urban suffering. Where was the bit I had on revolution? Oop, revolution. Okay, here. So, talking about the content of newspapers, I'll just read this quote again. "Is not the product of chance of some economic form. It is the result of precise psychological and psychoanalytic techniques. These techniques have as their goal the bringing to the individual of that which is indispensable for his satisfaction in the condition in which the machine has placed him, of inhibiting him the sense of revolution, of a subjugating him by flattering. In other words, journalistic content is a technical complex expressly intended to adapt man to the machine." So, whoop. Skipping around. Where was I? Autonomy. Okay, here we are. Right, so for the police to be efficient, they got to be independent, just able to do stuff. And you could think of the reasons why you would want to have police would, among other reasons, be to make sure that there's no sense of rebellion, right? They exist to subjugate the population, in a sense, and subjugate them to who? The technological society. So how does this technological society keep control of people? One of the ways is by having police, which operate, you know, as a very powerful autonomous organization, as spelled out here. Okay, another quote here. "The rules obeyed by a technical organization are no longer rules of justice or injustice. They are laws in a purely technical sense." So just one culturally relevant thing at this point. Consider, for example, the internet piracy is a crime. Let's watch a little video together. Internet piracy, it's a crime. Privacy one. You wouldn't steal a car. You wouldn't steal a handbag. You wouldn't steal a television. And then there's these images of people stealing stuff. I'm just pausing and breaking this up. Make sure I don't get copyright strikes or anything. Alright. When steal a movie showing a guy going into a video store. So back in the day, there was a lot of these video stores where people would rent things. Alright. Downloading pirated films, stealing. And it shows someone with a CRT monitor doing something that's against the law. Piracy. It's a crime. Okay, so the whole point of showing that was to say, like, you could say that stealing an internet movie or something, it's not a crime in the sense that you aren't depriving anyone of anything except in a very technical, theoretical sense. But, you know, that doesn't matter for something to be a law or not, right? It's not about justice or injustice. The laws is in a purely technical sense. So one word I brought up at the beginning of this stream was this whole algocracy thing. Pull up that word again. Algocracy. Oh, algocracy got news. Algorithmic governance. Liberal Algocracy Manifesto. Algocracy is inevitable, but will it be liberal? Right, I'll have to check out this website a little bit more. But here too, right, you could think of algocracy as the perfect automated instantiation of this stuff, where you have algorithms which perfectly apply the law technically, whatever that means, right, according to the algorithms. So, algocracy. Interesting. Okay, another point by Jacques Ellul. He says, technique is autonomous with respect to economics and politics. So this is an interesting bit. Just a point to bring up here. So there's this term you might have seen around the interwebs called dialectics. So two opposing things. You could look up Hegel and all this stuff. Dialectics. So, for example, in the United States, you might hear of Democrat versus Republican, or a capitalist system versus a communist system. Now, all these little oppositions, right, if you're a technical society fanboy, it really doesn't matter, because technique could continue developing in whatever political climate you are. So if we're like, oh yeah, it's the United States, they're capitalist there, and then the USSR, they're communist there. Well, we could see, you know, you do a study of both of these, and you could study how technique has been able to develop in both of these places, even though ostensibly they might be different by some considerations. In other ways, they are quite two sides of the same coin. All right, another quote. Technique elicits and conditions social, political, and economic change. It is the prime mover of all the rest. In spite of any appearance to the contrary, and in spite of human pride, which pretends that man's philosophical theories are still determining influences, and man's political regimes decisive factors in technical evolution. External necessities no longer determine technique. All right, so this is interesting. Let me just pull down to the list. So now we're talking about autonomy. And what's being said in this quote is that technique, it's autonomous, and that it acts and it's doing its thing regardless of what political systems people have set up, that sort of thing. Oh man, I shouldn't have closed the page on monism. Let me bring up page on monism again, because some similar language was used here. This is why I'm bringing this up. So I think talk about first stuff. So here, like the monism, the technological society is being described as, right, monism. this circle and dot represents the first metaphysical being. And then here, we're getting into quite philosophical or even religious language here, where technique is described as the prime mover of all the rest. So it's saying, despite all other appearances, it's like this thing is the guiding principle for stuff, I guess. So there's this impersonal thing, like technological society, it isn't a person, but in a way it's already been unleashed, right? This book's called The Technological Society, implying that technology is already active and at work. It's going, and whether you like it or not, it's gonna keep going, and it has these properties like self-augmentation and stuff. It will repair and refine and expand itself, all of this. And right, so as a kind of practical thing, I mean, if we take Jacques Ellul's analysis here to be kind of correct, his observations seem to be right, then it would be pointless to get too into any one political ideology. This won't solve all the problems because the technical machine will steamroll over all. So, for example, I became interested in a bunch of like libertarian ideas, for instance. So if I was like, oh, I'm going to be a libertarian, and by being a libertarian, I could fight, the system, fight the man, or whatever. Then what Jacques Ellul is saying is, I mean, basically that's futile, because suppose as a libertarian, you got your crypto marketplace, you got all sorts of stuff going. Then what might happen is just the technological society would grow, would continue to extend what it's doing just through using these technologies and stuff that you built. And in fact, this very story we could see with a lot of software stuff. So like I mentioned, this website, GitHub. Look at GitHub. So millions of developers and companies build, ship, and maintain their software on GitHub. Like a lot of people, they give away their software for free. They code for fun. They do all sorts of stuff on GitHub. GitHub's owned by like Microsoft and stuff. So people might have this idea about how, oh yeah, if we just have free software, we share these things, we could be free and stuff. Then it's very quick to see how if you make any technique that works, then the technological society would be more than happy to absorb the work that you have done and use it for its own purposes. So you cannot escape technique. Continuing, I quote, "Morality judges moral problems. As far as technical problems are concerned, it has nothing to say. Only technical criteria are relevant. Technique and sitting in judgment on itself is clearly freed from this principal obstacle to human action." So it's like technique is just this big thing, this monad. It's not a person, and it is not judged. It's just like technique, right? I don't know how else to say that. On the other hand, though, we could look at propaganda being used. So often propaganda is going to appeal to stuff like emotion, or to have people have moral outrage. Say like, oh, you oppose this policy because you don't care about the kids, something like that. Now, the big system, the technological society, is kind of immune from these criticisms in that it isn't like a person. So can you tell can a corporation care about anything? A corporation is a corporation, and a corporation, it just acts. It could be a legal person or whatever, but nobody, I think, well, maybe some kind of pan-psychism person, but I will say I do not believe like Coca-Cola cares or doesn't care about anything, because Coca-Cola isn't like a person. All right, continuing. We're almost done. So Jacques Ellul goes into a discussion of clocks and talks about how machines are regulated by those. So we can compare and see how the like a clock, it always runs in the same way. You know, we even have idioms like, you know, ran like clockwork, something like that, to talk about how consistent someone or something is. Like if someone were like, they got up every day at 6 a.m. like clockwork, it would be like, wow, they're almost as efficient as a machine, right? That sort of language. So machines, they're kind of like a clock, like that. And then you could see how, like, a person versus a clock, you know, a robot is going to be able to wake up at the same time every day, wake up better than a person, just because it's extremely predictable if you have the right inputs. Whereas with people, right, you could say people are inefficient in this sense, but it's not about efficient or being inefficient. You know, a person's a person. So a clock, mechanical way, and then you could compare this even to, like, let's say the rising and setting of the sun. So if you decided when you wake up, not as just like 6 a.m. or something, but instead you say, I rise with the sun and I go to sleep with the sun. You know, different parts of the year, you might be waking up and going to sleep at different times. So with people, right, we would have different rhythms than a machine would have. This is one way to see how machines and people operate or act in the world very differently. All right, another quote, which goes, no technique is possible when men are free. And this will relate to the clocks, so stay put. No technique is possible when men are free. When technique enters into the realm of social life, it collides ceaselessly with the human being to the degree that the combination of man and technique is unavoidable, and that technical action necessarily results in a determined result. Technique requires predictability and no less exactness of prediction. It is necessary then that technique prevail over the human being. For technique, this is a matter of life or death. Technique must reduce man to a technical animal, the king of the slaves of technique. Whoa, oof. King of the slaves of technique, King Bugman. That is some punchy rhetoric there. So let's talk about clocks again. So in computer programming, if we talk about like a program, a system clock, right? I'll just search up computer clock. Maybe operating system. Because the clock, CPU time. Clocks are very important in computers to make sure that tasks assigned and things, they don't collide. How do you decide what gets executed before another thing, and so on and so forth? So a computer will operate by clocks. And when you write a program, you specify the exact order in which stuff will operate for synchronous programming. We won't get into too many details. But then the program will execute in sequence as you direct it to, perfectly. So this paragraph says, right, no technique is possible when men are free, because if, unlike like a computer program, you might call a series of instructions. Let's say you tell people to do a series of instructions and a person says no. Well, then suddenly your technique has hit a roadblock. You cannot operate, especially if you have a very delicate interconnected thing, because the person is not responding to the technique, to the system. So, yes, he spells it out. Like, you have to become slaves of technique, basically. So I think with the clock, even look at how work often works now. Clocking in, clocking out. It's like, rather than going by natural human rhythm, asking people to do things and so on and so forth, the technical society way is, you know, you're operating by a clock, doing things based on clock, right? Okay. Quote, once again, we are faced with a choice of all or nothing. If we make use of technique, we must accept the specificity and autonomy of its ends and the totality of its rules. Our own desires and aspirations can change nothing. So this is going back like with the monism section, saying you got to accept the whole package. All right, now we're getting to the ending spicy quotes that conclude this chapter. So we're almost done. Let's go here. Okay, so Jacques Ellul writes, "For technique, nothing is sacred. There is no mystery, no taboo. Autonomy makes this so. Technique does not accept the existence of rules outside itself or of any norm. Still less will it accept any judgment upon it. As a consequence, no matter where it penetrates and what it does is permitted, lawful, and justified." Okay, so apologies for those who don't know or care about computer science, but that's kind of what I know, so we're going to have to go into this. So the point that's being made here is that within a technique, a system, all the things that you could do are enumerated. So one thing that happens, like when you're using the programming language, the sort of actions you could do, they're all within like a box. You can't do anything that's not allowed. So, you know, here, like I'm looking here at this node programming language, there's all these things that you could do. There's actions related to a console. So that's like, you know, where my notes are displayed here. It's a kind of console. Like operations you could do that have to do with debugging, the file system, like saving, writing files, HTTP, so like web server stuff. So these are all the actions you could do. And this, as this quote says, "For technique, nothing is sacred. There's no mystery, no taboo." So for all of these things that are listed here, you have the exact specification for how they work. So if you spend the time to study, you look into it, like there is no mystery. You could do anything at least as specified within this model. So I think mathematically infinite, but not infinite in the sense that, you know, I can't create a dog out of nothing. But infinite in the sense of mathematics and numbers. There's infinite combinations of codes I could write. And then we could look at another quote here that was really spicy, which says, "Technique advocates the entire remaking of life and its framework because they have been badly made." So I was actually surprised at the very explicit like religious language here. So it's saying that the technological society, it requires that we all become enslaved to the technological society, like this whole clock thing that we just discussed. Like a clock following a rhythm, you become like one of these functions that get called by a program. And then in this system, like there's nothing mysterious. Everything is known. So everything in this Node.js language, it's all defined. Likewise, you could have society in the same way where everything is defined. Now, what happens with that? So here I wrote some notes. Technique as a rejection of creation as good here, because it's saying creation is bad, right? There's too much messy stuff, so let's remake it in the image of technique. Humans might cause errors, so let's make humans more like machines, right? That's the idea here. And right, the rejection of free will and a mystery, what I mean by that is like to have people operate in this system, like we were looking at in the previous quote. It's saying that people should become, or it's an all or nothing proposition, and that no technique is possible when men are free. This quote here, right? No technique is possible when men are free, because in order to get the maximum efficiency, then you need people to behave in a particular way, which means them submitting to the system. And it's an all or nothing thing. So as technology marches on autonomously, we just got to accept what's being brought. And then it's describing the world in which, just like this programming documentation, everything is known. All right, so let's talk really quickly about the spooky esoteric stuff. Okay, so a lot of this stuff, you could call it Luciferian in the sense of Lucifer as the light bringer. So here's this phrase, Lucifer, also known as the angel of light. So what is that about? So here, like, I'll just read a definition. Luciferianism is a belief structure that venerates the fundamental traits that are attributed to Lucifer, the custom inspired by the teachings of Gnosticism. So Gnosticism often having to do something with like some secret knowledge as a way for salvation. Usually reveres Lucifer not as the devil, but as a savior, a guardian, or instructing spirit. Okay, so it's like, oh, maybe he's actually the good guy, presented as the bad guy, but is he actually the good guy? There's this idea being presented here. So you could say, like, what would the like characteristics of the devil be? So, for example, a lot of the first chapters of Genesis saying how creation was made and that this was good. But if you reject that and say that stuff was badly made, you reject that, then, you know, it's kind of Luciferian. So technique as a rejection of creation as good, and a rejection of things like free will as being good, saying, let's just enslave everyone to be efficient. So if any of this stuff is seeming evil to you, learning about the technological society, it's like, oh, why does the technological society seem evil? Well, it's like, well, in many ways, you could say it's a Luciferian system. All right, some creepy pasta stuff coming up. Quote from, returning to the text of Jacques Ellul, recent investigations in electronic techniques applied to biology have emphasized the importance of DNA and will possibly result in the discovery of the link between the living and the non-living. So once again, Jacques Ellul book from mid-20th century. This goes into the idea from some more esoteric, creepy stuff of the idea of the golem as the programmable clay matter. So let's look at a golem. An animated anthropomorphic being of Jewish folklore, which is entirely created from inanimate matter, usually clay or mud. And then through magics, then people would talk about how do you bring life to a golem. So here, let's just read this little blurb here. The existence of a golem is sometimes a mixed blessing. Golems are not intelligent, and if commanded to perform a task, they will perform the instructions literally. So you're like programming them. They're like the slaves to do stuff. In many depictions, golems are inherently perfectly obedient. In its earliest known modern form, the golem of Cholm became enormous and uncooperative. In one version of the story, the rabbi had to resort to trickery to deactivate it, whereupon it crumbled upon its creator and crushed him. There's a similar theme of hubris in Frankenstein, the Sorcerer's Apprentice, some other stories in popular culture, such as The Terminator. The theme also manifests itself in R.U.R., Karel Čapek's 1921 play, which coined the term robot. The play was written in Prague, and while Čapek denied that he modeled the robot after the golem, there are many similarities in the plot. So I think clearly here you could see how this idea of golem, you know, programmable matter, you could write instructions and it'll be perfectly obedient, right? You could see how that idea is coming up with the technological society and how to make humans more like these technical beings, but then also spawn up like AIs or robots and stuff to work alongside and do the same work that humans might be able to do for efficiency's sake. All right, another quote. Nothing belongs any longer to the realm of the gods or the supernatural. The individual who lives in the technical milieu knows very well that there is nothing spiritual anywhere, but man cannot live without the sacred. He therefore transfers his sense of the sacred to the very thing which has destroyed its former object, to technique itself. And so here I had two notes. We could look at this talk, just discourse about technological miracles. And then Jacques Ellul also brings up this note about how the products of technology, like computers and appliances, serve people as slaves, even though, you know, they're inanimate objects. They don't have a will of their own. So this is interesting. We could talk about, okay, we hear all this stuff about technological society. You could ask, like, and why would anybody want that, right? If it involves you having to become enslaved, like, it just sounds like a terrible deal. So maybe it's inevitable, but like, why would anybody accept that? And Jacques Ellul offers some answers as to why that might be. So let me go down to some of these, what he describes. So the proletariat, like the working class, they hope upon the so-called miracles of technique. So, for example, you talk about someone who's just working class, super poor, but they hope to get their Xbox or something like that. Or they hope some, you know, breakthrough new treatment will heal them, or something else, right? And somehow you might hope upon the establishment to deliver you something, to give you something that will solve your problems. You will believe in the technology in some sense as something that could help you out. And then the non-intellectual classes of the bourgeois expect nothing, yet they sacrifice themselves and devote their lives with frenzy to the development of industrial plants and the organization of banks. So you could think of, yeah, like manager types, people, technicians, people like this, or not technicians will come next, like administrative class, white collar workers. So they have to focus all their time and attention probably on things that they don't think are very fun or interesting. So why do they sacrifice themselves to it? They expect nothing, yet they do that. And then finally, the technician uses technique perhaps because it is his profession, but he does so with adoration, because for him technique is the locus of the sacred. There is neither reason nor explanation in his attitude. The power of technique, mysterious though scientific, which covers the whole earth with its networks of waves, wires, and paper, is to the technician an abstract idol. And that's Jacques Ellul's words, which give him a reason for living and even for joy. So the proletariat, they truly hope for some kind of miracle about it. Then you have managers who are kind of indifferent. They just do what they do. And then you have the technician who really idolizes the technological society. And Jacques Ellul, he gets really explicit about this stuff. So the only reason I'm like explicitly talking about like how this is Luciferian and stuff is because of the language that Jacques Ellul is using to discuss these things and the implications that come with it. So, for example, here we have this quote. Jacques Ellul writes, "Technique is the God which brings salvation." So this is a kind of, you could say it's a kind of Luciferian or Gnostic view of salvation that is being presented here. And right, as not like the Christian view of salvation, I had a note here. Ellul spells out the Antichrist aspect of technique and technique worship. So let's see. And then, so finally we're at the end of my notes here. Ellul ends the chapter with this quote. In this chapter, we have sketched the psychology of the tyrant. And by the tyrant, I think it's like the technological society. Now we must study his biology. The circulatory apparatus, the state, the digestive apparatus, the economy, the cellular tissue, man. So this has been a very long stream, but that is because there was a whole lot of content to go over, because talking about monism, universalism, and autonomy, these are the ways in which Jacques Ellul says the technological society is different from just developing technique in previous societies. This is what characterizes like the technological society, which has gotten rolling, and we would say is still rolling in its current forms, like this upcoming metaverse that's being developed. And right, Jacques Ellul talks about this as the psychology of the tyrant. And then it seems in this book, the stuff that he's going to get more into is sort of the body. So further, how does this thing work? Digestive apparatus, the economy. So how does stuff like churn and flow through it, like you would digest food? Okay, is biology this circulatory? Whoops. The circulatory apparatus he likens to the state, cellular tissue, man. So I'll probably finish reading this book just because we spent so much time looking at it already. But yeah, overall, I found this chapter finishing, or this is just chapter 2. I was quite surprised at how explicit Jacques Ellul was with the spiritual and religious type talk, saying like how the technological society, like he just calls it an idol, and he says like the technician is engaged in a kind of idol worship. It's like, what if I love computer programming so much that I worship like programming and computers? Yet we see that with like the whole transhumanism movement, which we've been talking about a bit on this podcast, this is the stuff of, like, you would say that these are the most advanced people in the technological society, like the elites. They are going for a kind of transhumanistic gnosis. So let's look at transhumanism here. So transhumanism is a philosophical and intellectual movement which advocates for the enhancement of the human condition by developing and making widely available sophisticated technologies able to greatly enhance longevity, mood, and cognitive abilities, and predicts the emergence of such technologies in the future. So, and then here's some people that are influenced with it. Julian Huxley. Who is Julian Huxley? Who is he similar to? Why does he look so happy? First director of UNESCO, president of the British Eugenics Society, and I think he was, yeah, he's related to some other famous people in the Huxley family. Like, where's Aldous Huxley? Where does he fit in? So Aldous Huxley, who wrote Brave New World, was the brother of Julian Huxley, who is an evolutionary biologist, eugenicist, internationalist, first director of UNESCO and these other societies, and then also he popularized the term transhumanism. Very interesting connections. So a lot more to go into, and it's been a long stream, so thanks. I don't know if anybody stayed around, but it'll be on the interwebs if you want to check out later. And yeah, so I was reading this book, and I have shared what I found about this book, and also what I found surprising and interesting through reading this stuff. And I will probably continue and do more streams, finishing and following through this book. I'll try to condense the content a little bit. Yeah, for this one kind of long, but because there's so much content, I figured might as well get it done in one video if it's something that I might do eventually. So with that, I'll conclude this stream. Thanks everybody who does view this, even if it's at a later date. And I hope you have a good rest of the day. Thank you.